The existing 2010 Land Development Code also includes this differentiation or distinction as it pertains to the Derby Review Board, that there is no inclusion of their role or authority as it pertains to land development and or any other regulatory review process that would have been enumerated. So what you see from 2010 to the 2025 is just a carry on of existing activities and duties that were previously already enumerated. So where you have that difference is between the charter and the municipal code, where it outlines the prescriptive roles for that body, but there is no mention since the inception of our zoning code, even dating back to 1988, with respect to Derby. So it's not a shortfall of the 2025. What you see there is just a continuation of an existing practice of the differentiation and the distinction between the powers and where they lie and don't within our powers that have been given to us under the regulatory practice.
So, I mean, I think, and thank you, Jason, for that clarification. I think we have a couple of problems. At some point in time, I think in the Derby area, we defined a design standard that we felt like was important. And there are some buildings that reflect that design standard, but not very many. And there is some concern, even the Derby Review Board has mentioned this, that maybe it's not as significant to future development as we might have thought, and trying to hold that standard sacred may be a part of what's limiting. Now, having said that, I think that there's still a way within the normal application process that the Planning Commission can review future development standards and make sure that they align with the intent of what we want to have happen in that area. So what we're coming to you tonight to talk about is that our recommendation would be these are the directions that we would need from the governing bodies. First of all, A, to dissolve the Derby Review Board to eliminate the conflicts that we've talked about and the review structures, and realign the Derby Development Review with standard land development code processes. 2, or B, the URA is the legally appropriate body where design or area identity input is provided, not a separate design review board. So we work with the existing URA board, with our existing planning commission, to support and to reinforce whatever design standards we think are important. C, we confirm that the catalyst funds should continue under the URA. So one of the accountabilities that the Derby Review Board has had is the use of the catalyst funds, and we think that that can still take place under the URA accountability and not need a separate board to do that. We'd like to confirm that the council supports that, and we'd like to also suggest that we think that there's value to possibly, when we do this, expanding what those catalyst funds allow us to do. In the past, the catalyst funds really were intended to be used for facade type improvements, and that's helpful. But we'd like some flexibility to, as we talk about this, to maybe think about in certain areas, maybe there's certain landscaping components that might be meaningful that could make improvements. Maybe someone has some significant infrastructure within a building that we might want to consider that's not just an exterior thing that might be an impediment to development at that location taking place. So we just want to talk about the possibility of maybe changing that catalyst fund to a kind of a flip program, which would be facades, landscape improvements to support redevelopment and to address blight. Any questions so far before I wrap up? Okay, so just really quickly, and then we can circle back and answer whatever. Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Commissioner Teeter, on the lighting part, is that already planned, and is that already coming to Derby? I know it is to most of the other parts of Commerce City.
The lighting study, is that what you're referring to?
Yes.
It's currently underway right now.
For Derby also?
Yes, in the Derby area.
No. Okay, that's all.
Yes, Vice Chair Nolan.
Thank you very much. I'm wondering at what point do we, as Urban Renewal Authority and also as a city council, discuss revisiting the design standards for Derby? There's been a lot of conversation about the fact that it's possible that the 50s, 60s Googies style is no longer relevant. And I'm not sure that spinning it off to community development addresses that problem. It just perpetuates the design that we have been wanting to have a discussion about for some time. And I know that the design review board was before us for an update, and we had the conversation with you as well, and you were interested in going that direction as well. So that's my question.
So-
When does the design review discussion occur?
So that'll be a part of the PUD amendment. I can give some additional details at the end of this during my report out where we stand with that. Fundamentally, and I mean this with all appreciation, there is no role for the Derby Review Board as it pertains to land use. Design is a land use consideration because we have already established commissions, primarily being the Planning Commission as it relates to, and the City Council, as it relates to the function and the review of entitlement applications. And design is associated with a entitlement application. So when introducing an additional commission, you're now introducing a dynamism that can create complexity and confusion. So I think where my staff is trying to bring the recommendation to a decision point is there are still opportunities in being able to be advised by a commission like the Derby Board as it pertains to vision, as it pertains to revitalization efforts that can inform the development of practices, standards, processes that can then influence the other groups that have an association, direct association with its review. But I think what we have seen over the past, I'll call it decade, is a bleeding or a blurring of the lines and the interpretive purpose of a group beyond the scope of what was the intention. And when we thought about that intention, we didn't think about how to actually implement or to activate that in a sense that was from a general set, consistent and compliant with the other enumerated regulations in the municipal code, as well as the land development code. So I think holistically, you can get to a stage of talking about the design standards. Those would have to come back before the council, because the council would be the approving body, because those would be associated with a plan unit development amendment to the zoning, which is also underway, which I will get into some greater detail. But I think where I would galvanize your discussion is, how do you want this body, either the council or to the URA, to be an advisory body to give you that policy guidance, to give you that policy direction that can ultimately then be turned over to me as the executive director and my staff to actually then go implement, to bring back to you all?
So when it comes to whether we remain with the Googie style that's in the current, that the design review judges all of their decisions against, when do we have that conversation about whether and how that might change?
Saying it in a different way, we have a plan unit development, which is the zoning powers for Derby. If we are looking at revamping the zoning powers for Derby, thinking about the land uses, thinking about the building and thinking about the bulk standards, right? That's how a building sits, how a building grows, and the landscaping around it. That in and of itself starts to lean into design standards that will be complementary to that zoning. So we would bring that to you as a package so that you can understand we're looking at advancing these uses based on the comp plan. And this is the type of architecture that could be allowed. I think we would want to be more expansive, more broad, because obviously as we've been very narrow and granular in our review of design, it has not led to the desired outcome. So being more broad in how we approach it, but having you all weigh in and see what those standards look like to get a level of comfort that will then be implemented when they go through the entitlement process, that would be approved by City Council. Zoning, design standards.
Are you saying that the staff will determine the design standards and that we then vote on them?
Staff, with a consultant, would bring forward proposed design guidelines that would be able to receive feedback and approval by the City Council.
And we can't have a role in terms of, let's say, if you don't do Googie, you might do something that emphasizes the Hispanic culture, for example, or you might do something that emphasizes an art district, those kinds of things. So you're saying that the City Council won't have a role in discussing which of those comes back to us. Instead, staff will choose or with the consultant, and then we'll vote on whether that's what we want.
If I want to parse to that level of detail, that is encompassed in the discussion that would ultimately be had with City Council. I'm keeping it high level to that, saying at the end of the day, Council will be the ones who will be making the decision, if that is so their choice, on the design standards. As part of that, we will have a process that we will outline that will engage the council and more than likely the community as well. I am not getting to that level of detail because we are still working through that, but I would assume that is inherent as part of our process that we would engage with this body and other bodies.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that it encompasses the community, that the decision is broad. The design review board members joined because they cared about Derby. They didn't just care about reviewing buildings and signs and canopies and things. So I just want to be able to ensure that everybody has a role, because it could be a great focal point in Commerce City.
Board Member Henson?
Thank you. I'm sorry, I have a couple of questions, several questions, because I'm trying to get up to speed on some of my history here. So I'd like to ask the Derby Review Board members, that's what I was trying to say. Thank you for being here. And I'd like to hear from other URA members. I guess my question, I have a couple of questions. Does Derby have a historic designation? Is it a historic district by designation by the state okay. So what I've garnered from a couple of conversations is that a very specific architectural design was the desire that would be implemented regardless of what kind of redevelopment were to take place there, was that sort of the goal, the role of the board, of the review board?
Board Member Vasquez?
Partially, yes. Most of our review focus even on simple things such as signage. But to say that we had a level of where we could affect what a building was in permanent ways, I wouldn't say so. It was more often more of just superficial facade and trying to get that that identity for Derby consistent. Yeah.
And then being, conduits with the community as review board members, is that the desire of the community to maintain a certain architectural style, or I mean, obviously there's a feel, obviously, of every community, but is the community really invested in keeping a very specific architectural style?
The thing with Derby is there's multiple different styles there. So El Jardín, it's kind of more of a Tex-Mex style.
Okay.
Before there used to, the reason why we kept, I guess, the retro kind of 80s, 90s, or 70s style is because we want Derby to have an identity. If we go to let's go at Old Town Arvada, there's a specific kind of style. And same thing with the Santa Fe, arts district.
Yes.
We just wanted to keep everything consistent in terms of what the community wanted Derby to be.
Sure. Do you feel that maybe it's more cultural than actually specifically architectural? I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, upon my research, more of that googly architecture and kind of goes to that Derby heyday. And we did meet a board member when we originally started. Remember Ethel? Yeah, Ethel. She identified that style as sort of Derby's heyday. And if you look at the census, that is actually when Derby peaked at its population.
Okay.
So I think it stems from that. And you still have patrons who own business who are in that same area. They can identify, hey, this is when Derby was at its best. So. But to Edwin's point, yeah, there's a lot of architectural styles through the years. I just think this one was connected to sort of a heyday of Derby. Yeah.
Okay, and then, and I'd be interested in feedback from other URA members, but I did want to ask the city manager, so in the development of the design elements that would go into the updated code or your comprehensive plan, is Derby, is that an area that could be singled out for certain design elements that would be specific to something inside the URA that could be singular, that maybe wouldn't be seen in other parts of the city because this is a historic or an area of urban revitalization?
Yeah, so great question. With the PUD being a unique vehicle for adoption of a separate zoning police powers and entitlement practices, it will also afford us to be able to, within that defined boundary subject to that zoning area, to also establish unique design standards that could be a collection of the different architectural types and flares and how to apply those. And particularly being a distinction for Derby. So that does exist today and would continue to exist going forward.
So it's currently a PUD?
Correct.
So that means people can submit anything if it's a PUD, because that gives them the free, right? That's because that generally almost makes, that's basically asking for a variance or sometimes an exemption from design standards as they exist in other areas.
Yes and no. So the PUD's already established what have been the exceptions from the underlying base zoning. So think of, they may have already looked at differing from certain land uses that could be allowed versus those that couldn't be allowed, that if you were applying the same underlying land use or zoning code, it may have been prohibited or vice versa.
Yeah.
Similarly, it allows for you then to really refine the zoning,
Okay.
not the zoning, but the design particular to that area that's unique from maybe across the street or within the general practical area. So the PUD, that what we're talking about here would be amending the PUD to make sure, do you have the right uses? Based off of what we've understood just with the evolution of Derby from its inception of that PUD. And is the architecture speaking to the property owners there today, the prospective property owners and the tenants, to be able to want to buy into the long-term vision and how to go about accomplishing that in a easier, more streamlined and effective practice.
So am I understanding, I want to say what I'm thinking because I want to make sure I understand. So the PUD cuts both ways in that it gives the applicant a little bit more flexibility outside of certain land uses that might be prescribed in other areas, but also gives the city and the URA or the URA the opportunity to have design standards specific to that PUD area?
Yeah.
That can be, that you can sort of, I don't say require, but that, definitely would be like more desirable for plans that would be submitted?
Yeah, and I want to be clear about this. The URA will have no functional role
Right.
in the design standards, because the application and the responsibility of the application of that will fall to the city side.
Yes, but I mean, but in developing those designs.
Correct.
Design standards, that.
Correct.
You can do that.
I
Yeah.
think what you're hearing from my team is that while they won't have a functional role in the establishment or the application or implementation of the design standards, they will, by the use of catalyst dollars, can help to fund property owners who may want to then update their buildings or update their uses that include that architecture and need that funding to bridge a gap. where the catalyst dollars could come into.
For existing businesses that are planning to stay, as opposed to somebody who's coming in to bring a new business in.
It could be applied to both.
Okay. Because in this redevelopment, I mean, is there a possibility with, I mean, revitalization that some buildings will be torn down and rebuilt in a certain design? I mean, that's the reason for the design standards, is that if something new is constructed specific, you know, as in addition to somebody just wanting to update the facade of their building, that there's some uniformity.
Correct.
So to speak, in that area.
Absolutely.
Okay. And then you said those design standards that would be established by staff then would come to the city council for approval?
Yes,
So
that's-
the council would weigh in on approving
Yeah,
those?
so I mean, obviously, communication is going to be a key piece to the discussion around design standards. So there will be probably feedback sessions with the stakeholders, which the URA, obviously, just because of the district would be one, city council, the community members, the property owners. And then there will be a final set of design standards that the council would adopt. Once again, if that's what they so choose, that could be done at the time of the zoning, after the zoning. I would always recommend doing it at the time of the zoning because it's just seamless transition, and it's easier to communicate the expectation.
Yeah, agreed.
But like I said, there's the difference between the stakeholder role versus the implementer role, and the URA will have a stakeholder role and then a supporter role by the use of the catalyst dollars, if that is how they so choose to continue to move forward with it.
Okay, and then one more question, because I know I've taken a lot of time. In the revitalization plan or the current zoning plan, does it allow for increased vertical development? Like what's the max in the Derby area?
I'd have to take a look at the PUD because the PUD establishes the height. I would say right now it's somewhere between probably 35 and 45. You know, so when we're kind of going through the redesign of the PUD, right, we're going to want to think about what are some of those bulk dimensional standards, right, the building forms. That will then help to shape ultimately then where the architecture comes that applies on top of that. But, you know, when we get to that stage, right, that'll be a milestone discussion that we'll have, you know, with the various stakeholders and ultimately then taking that information to who are the decision makers.
Right, which is not it's the city council.
Correct.
Yeah, right, okay, thank you, appreciate it.
Welcome.
Thank you. Board Member Kim?
Thank you. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
All right. First and foremost, my apologies for not being there. I didn't want to get anybody else potentially sick, so that's why I'm virtual tonight. A few questions. If we're looking at sunsetting a neighborhood, a specific board, as we launch a major development push like Flip, how do we plan to build a codified community input guardrails into the new review process to maintain residents' trust?
So, Councilmember Kim, this is Keith Morey. Let me just make sure I understand the question. You're concerned about if we do dissolve the Derby Review Board, how do we protect citizen input or their concepts for what needs to be preserved in the Derby area? Is that your question?
Yeah, so Derby Review Board, reserved seats for Derby residents and business owners, right? So
Sure.
Eliminating it removes their direct seat at the table. Asking this kind of forces the city staff to address the optics and propose, I guess, concrete alternatives. So that's what I'm trying to figure out. The fact that we're looking at potentially sunsetting DRB, and if we're looking at proceeding forward with Flip development, try to figure out what do we look like when it comes to allowing community to provide input, right, for guardrails, input guardrails into the new review process to maintain that residential input. Make sense?
Sure, absolutely. And I'll let City Manager Rogers correct me if I'm wrong, but I think what he was trying to express was all we're talking about tonight is making sure that there's alignment, that we think that this process needs some fixing. right? And we're not talking yet about what the design standards should be changed to, or if it should be changed at all. I think what we're suggesting is we think within the existing review processes that we have right now, the Planning Commission, as they review applications for development or for redevelopment in the area, could protect and preserve the existing standards that already are there. But we think that if there's going to be a discussion about should those change, that's another process that we would be involved in. I think that's why Jason was mentioning, you know, if we're talking about a PUD amendment, that's a whole process that you would be involved in. We would have citizen input, we would have professional input on what those design criteria might be shifting to or should shift to, and that would be a process that you would be involved in, and we could decide, have we vetted this enough? Have we got the input that we need before we move forward?
Thank you. And the other question too I have is regarding DRB. I know that was established, just doing a quick Google search. It was established under ordinance 2043. If we're looking at sunsetting it, what's the timeline for repealing or amending this ordinance?
That may be a legal question, Lee.
That's probably a legal question.
So it would require an ordinance to be approved on first and second reading. So as far as timing, practically speaking, right, it just depends on when we could get that on a council agenda. I think what's really important prior to moving forward with an ordinance that's rescinding the Derby Review Board is clarification of what authorities that are currently within the DRB's purview, whether or not any of those authorities should be transferred over to the URA's oversight. So I think you heard some discussion about the Catalyst Fund and determinations on where those funds are allocated, right? If you dissolve the DRB and you don't have clear direction on where that decision maker authority is going to exist, then you have something that's falling through the cracks. I think that's exactly why this is before the URA. I think that is the foundational thing that the URA should take on, particularly if we're going to dissolve the DRB.
Okay. All right. That's all I got. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Just to piggyback on that, so a community advisory board, would this consist of the chair and vice chair? Would they be part of that for their role? Just so that, I understand the shifting and all that, but just to their effort and to keep Vasquez and Vice Chair Vasquez and Chair Flores involved in the community advisory group.
I believe that is an option, and that's one that would be a determination by the city council.
Okay. All right, thank you. All right, board member Garriola.
Thank you, Chair. A couple things. I think, just to put it out there, I think the staff understands that Derby is a priority for this council that's seated. And I think it's very clear of the direction we want to go with it. So I do trust our staff to take the conversations they have with us individually as a group of what we want to do with Derby. As someone who visits Derby every Saturday and Sunday, I think I agree with the board members that everyone's looking to see how does Derby stand out, unified, right? Because there's a mix. And I think city council going on these URA tours that we're gonna be going on has to take in consideration the demographics that visit and live in Derby. And I think previous council has not, right? Derby has changed over the years. Even since I've been a kid, when we moved here in the 80s, the demographics have changed. I just met with Together Colorado, the social justice group, on Wednesday, and I asked them if they could come see this. And the church, Our Lady Mother Church, has 8 Spanish masses, 8. Over 6,000 folks go, and the priest was there, and he also said, you know, what is Derby? And so I don't think we're gonna have an issue of people getting involved with comments of what they wanna see Derby. I think it's us, 9 of us, to actually listen to those residents and put our biases aside and say, this is what the community that lives there, works there, plays there, eats there, and we have to listen to that. And I think there's plenty of opportunities for us. So I appreciate our staff because I think they're hearing us loud and clear. the second piece is piggybacking off what Chair Douglas was saying. If we do dissolve the DBA, which I was one of the first to say, why am I on this board, right? What role do I have, right? As council members, we approved $3,000 worth of windows, great. But what's the root cause of all that, right? What's the root cause? And I started going to businesses there and asking them, and the number one thing was crime and homelessness. That was those two came up constant, right? What are we doing? And then what is Derby? Is it they wanted a placita, or is it a theater? And I love a theater, but how many of my folks go to the theater? I do. That's it, right? So we're gonna want to. So I really just want us to really think: how do we get them still involved without this extra layer? And I think that was a great question, Chair, where it might not be them too, because they might have other things too, but how do we secure spots on this URA for people from Derby? And again, I trust our staff, I really do, and I put it out there publicly because they are the experts that listen to our community. We are the ones that listen to our community, so I have no issues with any of the design. That you guys will come to us with different options and say, yep, this is what I'm hearing from the church. So I just wanted to bring that, and I appreciate our staff.
Okay, thank you. Board Member Kim?
Thank you. One last question, and this is probably for City Manager Rogers. My apologies if you already answered this already. I may have missed it. Does the staff have the specialized architectural and urban design expertise required or already on staff, or do we potentially may have to hire external consultants?
So for this level of work, we would always go out. If we had the architect background on our staff, obviously that individual would serve as in a project management capacity of this scope and scale and size. Because when you're thinking about the work that we would diversify, expand on, and expound within the existing PUD to be inclusive, to be flexible, diverse, also nimble for changing landscapes that obviously we have seen come through Derby, we would want to be able to build it into one singular document so it makes it easier for any and all that are involved in different aspects of the process, either from a supportive through catalyst funds or from an adoption. They know where they slot in and how to use those documents to their benefit. So we would structure that PUD amendment, like I said, to be broad encompassing in how we would approach that as an implementational tool for the various groups.
So we would have to spend additional funds to get those experts to work with the city versus what the current DRB has on their volunteer board. Is that right?
That is correct.
Okay.
And I'll be able to provide an update on that aspect as well. Whereas we're already starting to engage and work with community development with respect to the PUD amendment, and in that, I've identified funds within the city manager's contingency fund, which we are appropriated on an annual basis for these type of events. As things come up, I can allocate certain dollars to be able to advance efforts if it's been identified as a council priority. Council has identified, I believe, dating back to the April meeting, when we begun this discussion to come back to you all around the Derby Review Board, that this was a priority by the council to continue to advance the PUD with the design guidelines. So we have taken formative steps to do that. So there ultimately will be, a point in a time where, depending on the contractual amount of that consultant work to accomplish this desire, that may come before the city council to approve the appropriation of those funds for that contract. It may be well within the city manager's authority based on the dollar amount. But there will still be a touch point by the council throughout this development of the new PUD amendment and the design standards, and basically the concept around Derby and its future from that initiation to the decision point.
Noted. Thank you.
Okay, sure, Board Member Hinson.
Thank you. I guess my question, and a comment kind of, and a question, about what is the overarching goal if the Derby area is inside the URA boundaries? Urban renewal, or I often use the word revitalization, and I've been through this in a previous city council experience in a different city, where a lot of folks said, we just want it to go back the way it was. But the thing that they wanted to go back the way it was no longer, and this is a much smaller area, it's not a whole neighborhood like Derby is that, but it wasn't really economically viable. Like, it wasn't going to be in the best interest of the city to put something there that had existed back in the 60s as it was. So my question to the other URA members and to hear from the DRB members is the desire, or is the idea, what's the vision? Is it to put Derby back where it was in its heyday? Because that may not meet the Commerce City has grown a lot. The city has changed, the economy is different. Types of businesses that exist are vastly different from, 30, 40, 50 years ago. So is the idea that we want to keep Derby the way it was, or we want to keep the culture and the feel of it, but realize that we're in 2026 and that we're building cities that we're talking about 2050. I mean, we should, envisioning things, from much further out, rather than just restoring something that was like, like an old cathedral in Europe or something. That's a different type of project. So I'm pretty new to the URA, and this is the first opportunity I've had to really ask these kind of questions. So I'm really kind of curious what the goal is, or if that's really been defined. Thank you.
Derby Review Board members, would you like to respond first?
So in my mind, piggybacking off Councilmember Guardiola said, we want Derby to reflect the community. So if they want, obviously, again, I'm kind of like, I love this because this is the first time I feel like Derby's ever gotten a discussion like this, to be completely honest. So again, I'm kind of like loving this whole thing, but we want essentially just attention to Derby. We want Derby to feel like it's a part of the community and where people can go, go grab an ice cream on a Sunday afternoon, Saturday afternoon, go, in this case, a theater or whatever, have their, somewhere where their kids can play and, they can hang out, something like that, essentially. And the thing that I've kind of been like realizing is kind of like we've always had momentum towards something, but say someone leaves, something happens, it's like we're back to square one. I feel like once we have what the community, the thing with the Derby guidelines, I guess, is they were very restrictive, and I feel like there still needs to be a level of attention to Derby. Obviously, with the Planning Commission, they can definitely take care of whatever they, stuff like that. But there still has to be, that attention to, what the citizens and the community of Derby really want. And I do think that there has to be some sort of place for them, because if we want Derby to change at the rate we want it to change, we want to, obviously it's not going to happen overnight, but it has to be a continual process to where if someone leaves or, someone who has that, there still has that progress to where we're not starting back from square one and going back to the lighting. Where's the lighting? Where's this? Where's that? And I do think that, we had a niche, but we definitely need not, kind of expand our reach, whatever that would be. But I still feel like the community still has to have some sort of input. And, I was going to bring this up later, but I talked to Monsignor Jorge de los Santos today, and I told him, hey, would you be interested in maybe doing some sort of event later on during the summer. And I was like, okay, if he promotes it, after Mass, hey, we can give like a raffle ticket, not a raffle, like a ticket. If, go and visit Derby, we'll give you a free water, free soda. Businesses there can promote their stuff. We can have more vendors there. And, the people from the church, instead of, stepping on their toes, it's just businesses at Derby. They can help run the games, mechanical bull, stage. And that's kind of where I feel like we can, like, he's an architect. The reason, he's here is to help with the guidelines. That's the reason I kind of brought him on. But yeah, it's essentially like we need some, like, again, I'm kind of the reason why I'm loving this is because this is the first time we're really having a true discussion about this. And yeah, that's kind of what, I guess, going back to your question, I'm sorry I kind of ranted, but yeah, we just want some sort of community involvement. Again, the city kind of has its idea, but it belongs, Derby belongs to the community. I want it to be the heart of the community, essentially.
Thank you. Okay, Board Member Teeter, and then Board Member Guardiola, and then Vice Chair Noble.
I just wanted to talk a little bit about what happened at Derby. And basically, when the malls came to town back in the 70s, well, that's when they started going downhill. And when the big box stores showed up, that's when they really went downhill. And I'm talking about American Furniture, all the furniture stores that were downtown Derby that just put them out of business. They couldn't compete. And the bowling alley, if we were to put another bowling alley there, there's not room for it. If you look around, the successful bowling alleys are 3 times the size of the one that was there. And it was just a small, I think 7-lane bowling alley, that was it. And yeah, it was fun. But we're gonna have to let the business community dictate on what they can make money at on this day and age, knowing that you can't really bring too big of a business there because there's no parking. I mean, everything was designed in the old days to have 5 or 6 cars parked out in front. Donut shop, there's no parking for the donut shop. They got to use their other neighbors' parking spots, when they get their business, so that we have a parking problem. But I mean, it's going to have to be a small shop type venue that happens down there. I'd love to see a restaurant go into where the bowling alley used to be with an ice cream parlor or something along those lines. That would work. But I would think, but it's all about the business community. They got to be able to make money at it, and I think if they would bring one down there, they could make money at it. But that's all I got.
Okay, thank you. Board Member Guardiola.
Thank you. The person he mentioned is the priest of Our Lady Mother Church. I always mess up his long name. But, he hits it, and thank you for meeting with him because he brought it up on Wednesday of how many people, has anybody been there on Sundays? It's packed. Traffic is crazy. There's cars up and down. There's vendors now, right? And I don't think we're capitalizing on Sundays, right? And Saturday afternoons with the Mass in the evening. But go Sundays, and you'll see the amount of people that are at the Mass. And how do we capitalize, just like you're saying, which is a great idea, of how do our businesses that are even there in future capitalize on that? And one of the things that the father said also is he looks at Derby and there's nowhere people could get together. And he had some ideas of what we should do and but it's true, right? And there's not walkable ways to get across 72nd, right? Especially from the church. So I think to your point is I think it's our job also as city council members to always have Derby in our forefront. And as Ward 1 and someone that grew up in the core, it always is for me, right? And I know some of my colleagues have the same priorities of like, Derby has to be a focal point in Commerce City, right? So knowing that we will advocate for what the community and the business sector and our church, right? That's only one church that's in Derby. There's other ones, right? There's other English masses. So keep that in mind, that I think it's our duty also to listen and go out to the community on a consistent basis, not just when this comes up, right? And talking. So I appreciate your input and ideas.
Thank you. Vice Chair Noble?
Thank you. Thank you very much, and thank you. Really appreciate hearing that. I completely concur that the community needs to be involved in this conversation for certain. And my concern, or my worry that I was trying to express, was that if we do the speed version of approving these, that will just be perpetuating the old design standards on a faster basis, as opposed to stepping back and taking a look at what the community wants to see in the area, and you know, that all of us would like to see in the area. And I happen to have had the chance to have a wonderful conversation with a representative from the Ministry of Justice, who is part of Our Lady, Mother of the Church. So that was a really great conversation that I had on Saturday. And yes, it is 5,000 or 6,000 parishioners who come through that church on a Saturday and Sunday. So it's quite awesome, that's for certain. And you know, I see the earliest photo in this slide presentation was of the mural that was put up on the building, and so that makes my mind think, oh, art also is, which added a lot to the community when she did that. So there's all sorts of different alternatives. I just don't want it to go so fast now that we're approving that the community development is approving changes that are in line with the current design standards without the community and the council and the URA all having a chance to have a conversation about what it should look like in the future.
Thank you. Board Member Trujillo?
Thank you. Going back to Board Member Henson's question about the vision, one of the priorities for me has been Derby from day one, and really reactivating that area, revitalizing it. In addition to the folks who live around there, there's a lot of others who travel down Highway 2 because they work downtown, or, you know, so it would be really nice to have a place to be able to stop somewhere in between that drive. I think it's also essential to make sure that we're providing, you know, the businesses the proper infrastructure, right? They deserve that too. And we have been working towards that. So that's essentially my vision. Most definitely community input through our residents and tenants and business owners. And I have no doubt that our city staff will solicit that information along the way. And it sounds like to me that the lack of progress that we have made in Derby has been due to the lack of an established process. And so I'm really happy that we're here having a conversation talking about how we can really move forward here. So thank you, City Manager Rogers, and, well, I guess Executive Director Rogers, for pulling in the economic development team, giving us this presentation. Thank you, DRB members. I can totally see an option where we have an advisory committee under the URA that will assist us in making these very decisions. So thank you for your service, and I'm really excited to hopefully have the both of you back to really move this forward. So thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions?
Yeah.
Yes, I also want to thank our Derby Review board members for being here, expressing your concerns. We've talked about Derby for years when I was on council, and there was some movement, but mostly it was just trying to figure out what the community wanted. And we lost a lot of ground. I don't want to see the area gentrified and push out the people who are there, the business. There are a lot of businesses there now who are struggling, and they want the opportunity. We also have landowners who aren't willing to invest. So we got to make sure that there is a good balance going forward, the collaboration, so we can make sure we don't lose track our focus on the community members who are there, because they've been really trying for a long time. I mean, I've been in conversation for 22 years, and you know, been in Derby a lot to eat and partake, but mostly it's people drive by. It needs to be more of an attraction, and it doesn't take much. It could be lighting, could be LED lights, just so people can get curious. Hey, what's going on over there, right? You have a big business owner over there that is selling, is a wood supply store. The younger brothers wood supply. So there is opportunity, but again, I don't want to see it gentrified either. And because that happens all over, and then people get pushed out, right? I don't want to see that. So I want to make sure we're all working together to make that happen. Board Member Guardiola, do you have one more thing to say?
No, and I think, my final thing is I think positive all the time. I do, right? Gentrification, that's not just, to me, is what are we going to do for Derby, right? And if there's some buildings that are new, is that gentrification? Maybe, maybe not, right? But I think it's always the positive intent that I believe in is how we uplift Derby from someone that's been here since 1983. 1983. Every Saturday I go to Beta's Barbershop. Every Saturday. And then I go get my chicharrones from Empresario. Sunday I get my menudo from Tamales or Tony's Taco. Every Saturday and Sunday. So talking to those people, some want new buildings. I'll tell you that much. I know some that want new buildings. Is that gentrification? I don't know. It's who gets a benefit out of it. If a business owner wants a new building, who are we to say, no, sorry. No, that fits in this box. So to me, it's positive intent of what we want to do together with you all, with the church, with the other churches and community. And I have faith in this council and the staff to bring up Derby. So that's all I got to say. Thank you.
Maybe let me go ahead and circle back to kind of what we were hoping we could accomplish tonight, and just to make a couple of comments, because I think we're right lock in step with what you're talking about. Edwin and I actually had a great conversation about how to engage with the church. And he actually, through his brother, reached out to the Monsignor Santos to try to facilitate a meeting that we're going to try to have to find out how we do engage with that group. So I mean, I agree 100%. We're right in line with what you're talking about doing. Jess Vasquez, who's another newly appointed member on the Derby Review Board, we had some great conversations because he's got some good URA experience, and he also has some close relations with Adelante with how do we continue to involve them and continue to hear from those good citizens what their perspective is. So what we're hoping to accomplish tonight, if you kind of go to the summary of the asks, is to confirm the support from the group, and I think we're getting close to that, to sunset the Derby Review Board and shift review functions, to confirm the direction on the future structure and eligible uses of the Derby Catalyst Fund under the URA, and confirm support to proceed with some kind of a flip development, okay? Staff will establish a community advisory group, and we don't need any council action to do that. So what we're thinking the next steps for this would be is, if we're all on board, staff would go back and we would draft the necessary ordinance updates that would have to come back to you to make sure that we heard you correctly and that we're incorporating what you want us to do in a way that allows us to move forward. So IGA revisions and program framework. We'd return to the council with the materials for review and refinement, and incorporate council feedback prior to any formal action. So if we're all on board, I mean, I think we've discussed this enough, and we've heard your input. I think if you're in line with that, we have clear direction for what you would want, and we could go begin drafting the necessary documents and bring those back pretty quickly so that we could move this forward and not have this take too long. Because I hope you understand, we're as passionate about trying to find a solution to that part of our city as you are. And we're very heavily invested in trying to make that happen. I've been here for 3 months, and I feel that energy and that commitment, and we're very actively engaged in that neighborhood trying to make that happen right now. We've got some significant efforts that we're trying to move forward to create some kind of a, I don't like to call it a farmer's market, maybe it's an international market or something like that, to begin to re-energize that area. The lighting study is underway. The construction of the intersection just east of the donut shop is underway to try to get some of these things that people have said for so long need to happen. We're trying to do that, to move this needle forward very quickly. I'd love to have the problem that Councilmember Noble says, where we've got applications that we're approving so fast that maybe you think we're getting ahead of you. Hopefully we get to that point, because I think that'd be a great problem to have.
Thank you. Board Member Sandoval?
Thank you. I'm actually really excited about this discussion, especially because I find that it's another way to bridge the divide that we've talked about in the city, especially to Commissioner Trujillo's comment in regards to, we have a lot of activity traveling from the north to the south, heading into Denver and vice versa. That would be a great way to bring community together, have an area where people feel like this is home, they can congregate, and it really focuses on bridging that gap. So I'm excited about the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. So is council, as the board members of the URA, okay with what's being presented today? Board Member Hanson.
I just have one quick, what is FLIP development? I don't know that acronym.
Facade landscape improvement.
Oh, okay. So how is that?
The current program really just only anticipates facade improvements.
Oh, okay.
We're wanting to make sure that you're supportive of us possibly expanding that so we could do other things like landscape improvements or interior building improvements, because the current program really just limits us to exterior facades, and we think that there's potential to use those more creatively.
Great, thank you.
All right. I know we're not voting for this, but everybody okay with staff moving forward? How about online? Board Member Kim, Board Member Machuga?
Yes.
All right.
Yes.
Thank you. Okay. All right, you got your clearance there. Okay, on to resolutions. Resolutions URA 2026-006, resolution of Urban Renewal Authority of the City of Commerce City, authorized and approved a professional service contract with CBRE Incorporated in an amount not to exceed $100,000. We'll ask, okay, is there a presentation on this, or?
No, I don't really think so. I mean, we had a contract for services with an older company that we let lapse. And this is an attempt to replace that. We don't have a specific project in mind for these services, but we need the ongoing ability to have a brokerage firm like this that we could reach out to if we needed to get an appraisal on a piece of property, or if we were trying to find a piece of property that we felt like we needed to do something with. We need a third party that could do that kind of work for us. So this is just an external contract that will allow us to do that when we need to.
Okay. What was that amount of the last contract? Was it similar, or was it less?
I don't know the answer to that. I think so, yes.
Okay, thank you. Any board members have any questions?
Mayor,
right.
real quick.
Sure.
To my right is Caitlin Quanders. She's a special counsel for the URA. She'll be speaking in a moment to all of you. I just wanted to introduce her so that the new URA members know who she is. And she astutely just noted that the URA resolution actually has the incorrect date at the bottom. It was, I believe we had this previously scheduled for May. So I would ask, if you ask for a motion, that we have a motion to approve this resolution with the modification of the corrected date. That way we can amend that via scrivener's error without having to bring this back to the URA.
Okay.
Great catch. Thank you for that, and sorry for the mistake.
All right, do any of the commissioners have questions? Board Member Hanson?
Hi. So how many, so this would be for disposition of buildings owned by the city inside the URA boundary? Or I'm confused I thought I saw in the meeting update that this is, you're contracting. What is this contract for? Is this for disposition of property inside the URA?
Yeah, the contract anticipates us being able to use CBRE to investigate potential properties for purchase, for valuation, for,
Oh, to acquire, so not, okay,
correct.
okay.
Both. So the URA currently owns property within the Mile High Greyhound Park. That's parcel A and parcel B. So this company could serve as the broker in soliciting proposals
Okay,
based on the approved master plan that we have for the Mile High Greyhound Park, while also investigating acquisition opportunities within our districts, if that makes sense.
yes, great, thank you.
Okay, Vice Chair Noble?
Thank you very much. What was the process for choosing CBRE, the real estate firm CBRE, as opposed to any of the other real estate firms that work in Commerce City?
I'm sorry, just wanted to point of clarification, because some of this started before I started. We went through an RFP process and had different companies submit, and based on their experience and their availability to meet our expectations, we selected CBRE to perform services.
So we didn't do an RFP or anything?
She just
said
that they did.
We did. Okay, thank you.
Sure. All right, Board Member Trujillo?
Yes, I'd like to move to approve URA Resolution 2026-006 with a modified date of June 8th, 2026.
Okay. Board Member Teeter, second? Okay. All right. Any discussion? Any more questions? Okay, the motion on the floor is to adopt Resolution URA 2026-006 with the modified date of June 8th. We'll ask the Secretary to read a title, take a roll call vote, please.
Thank you, Mayor. I will read the title, or chair, but then we can just do a voice vote. Resolution URA 2026-006, resolution of the Urban Renewal Authority of the City of Commerce City authorizing and approving a professional service contract with CBRE, Inc. in an amount not to exceed $100,000.
No, it's fine. I was just blowing.
Okay, thank you. Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say nay. Online?
Aye.
Same. Aye.
Okay, motion passes 11 with one excused absence. Okay, I will invite Executive Director Jason Rogers to give a report out, please.
Thank you, Chair. I will try to step through this quickly for you all. Starting with Derby Blight Study. Staff is working with procurement to finalize the scope of the RFP to conduct a Derby Blight Study. You all may remember that was a discussion that was held in April to determine whether or not the boundaries could be reestablished for a new URA to continue the life for its utilization of tools for redevelopment and removal of barriers, and also as part of that to see whether or not the boundaries can be slightly expanded, retained as is, or will need to shrink based on our assessment. That is on track to be issued by the end of Q2 for us to ultimately then select and award a contractor or a vendor to perform that work for us in Q3 of this year. We talked extensively around the Derby PUD amendment, and our staff is working closely with the community development team on that process. That work will focus on obviously the land use framework alignment, as well as other redevelopment priorities, as we've talked about, site site design flexibility, updated design standards, and clear pathways for future investment and infill opportunities. The Derby Diamond Reconstruction Project, the reconstruction of the brick pavers at East 72nd and Monaco, known as that lovely Derby Diamond, is set to begin June 15th, with completion anticipated on and around August 24th. So a 10-week time period is what we're anticipating for construction. That will replace the aging brick surface with a durable, low-maintenance colored concrete designed for better withstand traffic, while also addressing future upkeep issues that we have seen with the current pavers that we have. During construction, motorists and pedestrians and nearby businesses can expect some modified access routes and temporary closures, and we intend to continue to maintain access for our surrounding businesses during that period of time. Artisan and Farmers Market, we've completed the RFP process and received one qualifying proposal to operate the 2026 Artisan Farmers Market. We have reviewed funding options with finance and legal, and we are going to be moving forward with use of the city manager's contingency fund. I made reference to that earlier, to keep us on a streamlined and efficient path. That does not require any action by council, but I am making you all aware of how we are advancing that project. That market is planned for August to October in Derby, which aligns with some of those revitalization efforts that we've kind of heard tonight and more broadly back in April around the district, and refining the logistics and sponsorship and contract details is where we currently stand today. A different one, Derby Public Realm and Park Revitalization. So we are working closely with PRG to explore opportunities to revitalize Joe Riley Park as a broader part of the Derby activation strategy. So we're looking at some quick win improvements, some longer term investments to make the park more welcoming, comfortable, usable for families, youth, and visitors. A key part of this work is developing a green master plan concept for Derby that is focused on adding shade, trees, and comfortable gathering spaces for the community. All of that will feed into a more connected, more inviting, and vibrant Derby business district. Derby lighting update. The city received a Crime Against Safer Streets grant from the Colorado Department of Justice. Once again, that is the Colorado Department of Justice, to evaluate how lighting conditions can influence crime in the Derby area. As part of this effort, a consultant conducted a comprehensive photometric study of Derby. That analysis is now complete, and they are finalizing those recommendations on updated lighting, proposed location for new poles, lighting types, with all of that feeding from the approved 2019 Derby lighting and signage plan, taking a holistic district-wide approach to ensure consistent, adequate lighting for both vehicles and pedestrians, so that we can bring that forward back to the URA and the City Council for feedback before we bring forward for final considerations of construction funding. That comes out of those recommendations and that feedback. Mahi Greyhound Park, as I noted just a little bit ago, we own parcels A and B. We are working on an RFP to be able to finalize the scope to take those properties back out to market. You all may remember that back in the 2023 timeframe, we had previously taken those two properties out to the market through a competitive RFP process. We had 3 proposals. A selection of a firm at the time was made. We had entered into a purchase and sale agreement, had worked very closely with them in the development of a master plan for both properties. As such, had included a public multi-purpose building that would be developed in concert with Adams 14. That project and that development stagnated, did not go anywhere. So we ended our relationship with that development partner, and now are reviving the discussions of taking those back out to see who may submit a proposal to the URA for making a new determination on who to enter in with. There is still an outstanding question as it pertains to the cooperation agreement obligations that the city and the Adams 14 school district have as it pertains to a career site. I'm going to get the designation, but a career site use, and whether or not we have operated in good faith. Those conversations will occur at the appropriate time. But as we currently stand, that RFP will be issued by the end of Q2. with the hopeful selection and award, if all things go well, by Q3, Q4. And then last but not least, you all most recently approved funding in and around Bridge House. Bridge House is a work that brings the teams from community well-being, public works to clearly define roles and responsibilities for a nonprofit to provide certain performance within our districts for maintenance and upkeep, that being Derby as well as Mile High Greyhound Park. That work is going to be picking up here soon with execution of that contract with that group, but wanted to make you aware that that is still moving forward. And that is and those are my updates for the URA board today.
Thank you, Executive Director. Board Member Guardiola.
Thank you, Chair. One of the things we discussed with the father and the social justice group is communications, and I talked to Jason today, and I'm glad. Could you get that to them so they can announce it during their masses about the construction that's going to be happening during Derby? I think that just would be a good point for the father to mention after his masses. If we have flyers, he also said that we could put them in the church in the back. And I know Jason knows a lot more of what my discussion was, and I'm glad that, Keith, you're doing that. But I think that's just crucial that there's going to be construction.
I don't think that should be an issue.
All right. Thanks again to Derby Review Board members for being here today. Appreciate it. And seeing no more further business.
Mayor, may I?
Yes.
Very quickly, as I said, I wanted to introduce Caitlin Quander.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that.
No, go ahead.
Sorry, Caitlin, go right ahead.
No, hi. Hi, my name is Caitlin Quander, and I've had the chance to work with a number of you, but not all of you, and so wanted the chance to just say hello and kind of explain my role as it relates to the URA. I was just looking back, and I have served as special counsel to the Urban Renewal Authority for over 13 years, which time flies. So my work as special counsel, I specialize in urban renewal and public finance, and represent a number of urban renewal authorities throughout the state, some small, some big, and kind of can provide that feedback. My role to date has really played where you have a big special project, for example, when Mile High Greyhound Park was really kind of gearing up and the plan was going forward, and same thing with Sand Creek, and potentially here with Derby relooking at the plan, right? And that kind of adds an additional level of legal work that really shouldn't fall in the city attorney's office, and that's where we come in and help kind of provide those supportive services and kind of that special advice. And then similarly, you know, from time to time there are arrangements between the city and the Urban Renewal Authority, and it can feel very awkward to have to wear both hats on behalf of your city attorney. And so in that instance, I come in and wear that hat for the Urban Renewal Authority to represent it in an intergovernmental agreement discussion with the city. And so, yeah, I don't know if you'd add anything.
I think as far as, you know, the short term, right, we have an interest in the URA meeting more frequently. So you will be seeing Caitlin more frequently. Behind the scenes, she is working on the revisions to the bylaws per the discussions that we've had over the last several months. She just referenced an example of an IGA. We are also negotiating an IGA between the URA and the city. So, right, I can't be on both sides of that deal. She would be operating as special counsel on behalf of the URA to clarify roles, responsibility, potential allocation of funds to the extent that the URA is expending funds for city staff time, et cetera. And then the last thing was a council member had expressed an interest in getting a URA sort of 101 training, which she and I talked about. Caitlin might be able to highlight a little more, but she's done that for other URAs. We can get that on a future agenda for the URA if you would like. So I wanted to make sure that we flag that as well.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Caitlin. Appreciate that. Any council members have questions for Caitlin? Board Member Sandoval.
Thank you. I think it would benefit all of us, especially majority of the council members that are commissioners, board members. I continue to lose track of what our title is. But I think we would benefit from that training, so I would definitely would appreciate that.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, certainly, I do it in both contexts. Sometimes the whole board would like to see it, and when we can take half an hour at an upcoming board meeting to do a little bit of urban renewal 101, and others, prefer to do kind of that as a one-off training. So it's really up to this board on how you'd like to have that.
All right. Well, thank you. Appreciate that. Any other questions, comments? All right. Well, thank you, Caitlin. Thank you, City Attorney Zarzaki, for stopping me. Okay, time is 7:26. Seeing no further business, we're adjourned from this meeting. So, give you a 2-minute break. No, just kidding. Be back at 7:30. 4 minutes is good enough? Is that good? All right, thank you, council, for taking a break and being back. I will now call the study session back to order. 7:34. Presentation on the SRSA annual training. I will invite Lee Zarzecki, City Attorney, forward to introduce this presentation.
Thank you, Mayor. Appreciate it. I will be handing out some materials for all of you that are here in person, but it is my honor to introduce Sam Light, the General Counsel for SRSA. I believe that I've flagged this to all the new council members, but we had Sam come provide an overview primer for the prior council last year. I think it was warmly received, and it is, I feel my obligation to make sure that you all have the information and legal advice that you need to do your jobs effectively. So it is my goal to have Sam come on an annual basis to give you an annual training. The topics may change slightly depending on what you all get out of this and what the issue du jour is next spring. But without further ado, I'll let you take it away, Sam.
Thank you, Sam, appreciate it.
So we're the insurance provider for the city for your property and casualty covered. And here's the interesting fact, I was getting ready for this presentation. The city of Commerce City is one of the founding members of SRSA.
Yeah, can you get closer to the mic?
Thank you, Sam. There we go. There we go. As I was getting ready for the presentation, I went back and looked, and fun fact is that the city of Commerce City is one of the founding members of SRSA back in 1982. Any guesses what your population was at that time? 13,000. Yeah, so you've grown a little bit, and so have we. But at SRSA, we're a quasi-public entity ourselves, and our only insureds, the only thing we do is insure Colorado cities and towns and affiliated entities. To give you an example, we provide the insurance coverage for your affiliated urban renewal authority. Your housing authority is also a member of SRSA, but we treat them, they're separately insured as their own standalone member of SRSA. We insure about 90% of the cities and towns in Colorado. And being a public entity ourselves, we have a little bit different attitude towards risk management that I think we share with our members, and that is that we're kind of all in this together, right? Just as you're working locally to do the right things to protect the interests and assets of the city, we aggregate that up at SRSA. Our only two concerns at SRSA are the interest of the city as a city and the interest of the pool as a pool. And so in view of that good risk management philosophy, we have this notion with which I hope you agree, and that is that good risk management culture, right, starts even at the highest levels of the organization, right? Another aspect of that is, do you agree with this notion that every once in a while, elected and appointed officials might do or not do some things that might get the organization or the particular official in a little bit of a pickle or in risk, right?
We haven't seen that
yet. Yeah, and that's not the type of practical risk that we see day to day. Our bread and butter is a lot of stuff like property damage risk, knock on wood. I know there was a little hail today, but on the property side, we deal with property damage claims, auto physical damage claim, a lot of routine slip and fall type of things. On the riskier, more difficult types of claims on the liability side, we handle employment practices claims, everything from that to police liability claims to slip and fall claims. And we're going to talk about what that is and some areas around that. But my training for you all is to talk about some risk management principles at the governing body level. Just to get some principles on your radar, talk a little bit about your own exposure to liability risk and then organizational liability risks as well, and then talk about some best practices around risk management and governance that I hope help you succeed individually as council members, but also collectively as a council. So we are going to talk, make sure I point this in the right place. There we go.
We'll talk a little bit about liability protections and their limits, okay? We'll talk about organizational structure and liability, how that affects your risk profile. We'll talk about transparency for the new members. Our new members, have you had service in local government before? Coming right out of the private sector? As you know already, transparency expectations, right, are a lot different in the public sector.
Worked in the public sector, but.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, and so we'll talk about what that means, and then a little bit, we do a separate training on ethics, but I do want to get that on your radar, just to talk briefly about the ethics rules that apply, and then a couple of points on personal conduct, because they can have an effect on risk profile as well, and even if they don't ever present themselves front and center with a third-party liability claimant, right? Personal conduct and the way a governing body works with each other and interacts with each other can certainly have an impact on your governance dynamics, right? And faith and trust in government. So those of you who have heard my presentations before, you know, not attorney-client discussion here. That's why your city attorney is here for all the hardball questions involving legal issues. And the same thing, your city manager is here for all the hardball questions that are in the administration wheelhouse. So, but feel free to ask me questions if you have any. I want to make my time with you as useful, our time together as useful as I can. There are a couple of handouts that I'll mention as we go through the material. Maybe I'll start with the fun stuff and just get those two handouts out of the way. Thank you very much for the invitation to visit with you. We love to interact with our members. We love to hear feedback, good, bad, any concerns or kudos that you have. And we'd like to get together with our members. So two of the handouts relate to some upcoming opportunities we have to get together with our elected and appointed officials and municipal staffs. And that includes, if you're going to the CML conference this year on Tuesday, we have an elected and appointed officials appreciation lunch that's open to everyone, officials and staff. It's just a couple of minutes away from where the CML event, it's on Tuesday, and there's lunch and then some training opportunities after the lunch as well. And then we also have member appreciation lunches around the state, and there's a flyer on that as well. So we have some here in the metro area, but wherever you may be, if you're vacationing somewhere across the state and you see that CIRSA flyer, and you know, I'm not sure if that's how you really want to spend your vacation, but you're some far-flung corner of the state and you see the CIRSA member appreciation lunch is going on in that area, please join us. We'd love to see it. Okay. And then the other two handouts relate to CIRSA. You can learn more about CIRSA at www.cirsa.org. But for the new folks in particular, I've placed a copy of our CIRSA at a glance handout, which tells you more about what we do on behalf of our public entity members. And then the last one does relate to an actual liability risk for the council and has to do with the use of electronic communications in doing your work. Okay. I thought I'd do a little bit deeper dive than we did last year around the liability principles that relate to elected and appointed officials and municipal governments in Colorado. And I hope for the new folks, it wasn't the first burning question on your mind when you took office, but you know, there's that question of what's the risk? What's my liability risk, right? As an individual elected official, can I get sued and can I be held individually and personally liable for something that I do or don't do as a elected official? So here's, in no particular order, here's some good news and some bad news. Well, isn't this interesting? As elected officials, you face liability exposure both under federal and state law.
Lovely.
Thank you, right? But let's start with state law first, okay? Because we have really nice liability protections under state law. We have, and then what I'm talking primarily here is about tort liability. Can someone who feels like they've been injured by something you did or didn't do as elected official, can they bring an action under state law and sue you for bodily injury or property damage or personal injury, that kind of thing? So the first thing to remember is we have a very protective statute called the Colorado Governmental Immunity Act. I think every state has that. But it's got a couple of layers of protection. The CGIA is the state statute that governs any claims against public employees or officials for injury or damages that lie in tort, okay? So a tort is basically a claim for money damages other than a breach of contract claim. So somebody bodily injury claims, personal injury claims, property damage claims, those kinds of things. And the statute sets this framework where there's immunity protection for elected and appointed officials and employees, and even for volunteers. there's limits on the amount of damages. So even if there is liability, there's limits on the amount of damages that can be imposed, and there are notice requirements, which in our world at CIRSA, our bread and butter is handling these claims. When they're covered, they get turned into our claims department. That notice requirement under the state statute is a very helpful tool for all of us, because it basically says that a claimant has to give the entity and the employees involved notice before they can file any lawsuit. It gives us a heads up that a lawsuit may be coming. And frankly, if it's not a good situation, one that is suggested needs to be settled, it gives us an early opportunity to resolve that type of claim, right? But it's a good way to understand claims before they become full-blown litigation. In terms of the limits, in case you're curious, the state statute sets, kudos to anyone who could read that print on the screen, but the amount of damages that can be awarded for actions that are covered and that stay within that immunity statute are adjusted every 4 years. And the current limit is that any single claimant can recover no more than $500,000. If 2 or more people are injured in an occurrence, then the maximum they can recover is $1.4 million, with no single person recovering more than $500,000, okay? So those were just adjusted effective January 1, 2026, okay? Yes, sir.
Councilmember Teeter.
I just heard a claim on the news, Elijah McCain, I think it was awarded, it was in the millions of dollars because the ambulance service give him Narcan.
Right.
And so that's way over 500,000.
Yeah, that was, the exposure there was federal civil rights liability. And so the damages cap under the state tort statute do not apply to federal claims. Now, I'll give you another high-profile one that's out of today's headlines. There was just a jury verdict awarded against a municipality down South Metro area, not a CIRSA member, but a verdict was entered for $24 million on a police liability claim. And the exposure there is federal civil rights liability, for which the state tort caps do not apply. Other high-profile examples, one not involving us, is in the news. I think there was some recent news that Denver today, their city council was considering settling some of the claims that were brought in light of the protests back in 2020. That's a federal civil rights liability exposure again. And then if you want to know one involving CIRSA members, the situation with the law enforcement liability claim out of Silver Plume, Clear Creek County, involving the young man who was killed in a police incident a couple of years ago, was settled for $19 million. Not all of that was CIRSA's. There were 5 law enforcement agencies involved, but CIRSA was involved in that with 2 law enforcement agencies. And of course, at that level, we're talking about involvement of reinsurers and excess insurers.
So this person that just got shot up on and killed up on 72nd and Dexter by Adams County Sheriff officer, is there potential for a lawsuit on that case? The guy came out to check his backyard because he heard noises and then he was shot and killed.
The law enforcement is always a risk exposure, right? And it's interesting, but the high profile, very difficult claims are kind of like lightning strikes. You see a lot of these incidents reported on the news, but it's not really easy to predict which one ends up being a major case that picks up statewide, national news attention. The other thing is it's hard to predict what pace these claims ripen at. Sometimes the incident will happen and you won't hear from the claimant or the family or a plaintiff's counsel for quite some time. In other situations, they'll engage, if they're going to pursue a claim, engage plaintiff's counsel whose modus operandi, right, is to get the body-worn camera footage and get out in front of it in the media very quickly. But we don't try cases in the media, right? We try them under the legal principles that apply. So Colorado is right up there with California as having a difficult reputation for law enforcement liability. And that's true that the exposures there, no matter what department we have great departments like yours where the claims history is very good and the exposures are low, but nonetheless, in the reinsurance world and in the law enforcement liability coverage world, it's an extremely expensive line of coverage, right? I think law enforcement liability coverage for many of our members on the liability contribution side makes up 40 to 50% of their contribution. That's just the nature of the world we live in. Yeah. Is that helpful? Okay.
City Attorney Zarzegi?
Sam, so you highlighted that, the CGIA applies to employees as well as officials. Do you have any examples where the CGIA elements and defenses have been implicated for council action? Oftentimes I hear a member from the community comes up and says, if council hasn't taken this action, I'm going to sue because you've not done anything, right? For an example, have you in your experience with CIRSA experienced actual council actions that have resulted in CGIA liability?
Yeah. If somebody tries to make out, I think there's a little bit of a misperception among the public that if they don't necessarily get the answer they want, somehow you wrong them, which would be even more catastrophic. Risk exposure for the risk exposure for that broad, right? But sometimes it presents itself of, you didn't do this, and therefore, as my elected officials, you've wronged me or you've been negligent, right? There's no such theory of liability. There's no broad principle under which you're simply negligent for failing to do something or doing something, right? And that ties into the next slide, which is that the first protection that statute has is it says that you individually, collectively as council and as a city are immune from state tort claims, right? Except in areas where immunity has been waived, right? So that's the first level of protection. Now those waivers are primarily for things that aren't in your wheelhouse. For example, there's a waiver for a bodily injury or property damage claim for an auto accident. Well, I guess that could implicate you if you're using a city-owned vehicle to drive back and forth to an elected official's event and you get an accident while you're driving in the course and scope of your duties as an elected official, right? But that's not a front and center risk exposure, right? Other waivers are things like negligent operation and maintenance of a water system or a sewer system, dangerous condition of a public building. So you can see that naturally the waivers where the protection would go away just aren't there, right, with respect to the work that you do. Now, there's a second layer of protection which ends up being the second exception, however. The immunity statute says that you have these protections, right, and are immune from liability, and the city, and by extension, has an obligation to defend you and pay judgments entered against you so long as the claimed liability arises from acts or omissions in the course and scope of your duties as an elected official, right? And as long as that conduct is not willful and wanton. So if you flip that around, that becomes the exposure that we see, is where a injured claimant will say an elected or appointed official or employee was acting outside the scope of their employment or acting willfully and wantonly, and that's where there's a potential for individual personal liability, okay? So in the world of claims that we see, once in a while, we'll have a claimant who believes that they were on the receiving end of intentional defamation by an elected or appointed official, or tortious interference with their business, or publication of false facts. These are all cognizable torts in Colorado. Publication of false facts or disclosure of personal information that breaches a privacy interest. Conspiracy, civil conspiracy, right? And you can see that those are all kind of difficult risks, right? And if that conduct is deemed or adjudicated to be willful and wanton, that's where there's an individual liability exposure, right? And that's kind of intuitive. You ask yourself, well, if I'm about to do something and it seems like it's a little risky and I'm getting outside of my lane, or worse yet, I'm engaging in intentional conduct, right, outrageous conduct, you just ask, well, was I elected to do that, right? And the answer is no, so you can see where the thin ice is, right? So that's the way that works. But getting back to the way it's presented on the slide is that, again, the city, and by extension, SURSA, has an obligation to defend and indemnify you for claims for acts or omissions that are within the course and scope and are not willful and wanton, right? So you have that personal liability protection, right? As long as you're staying within your SOE and not acting willfully and wantonly. And so, let's see. Willful and wanton conduct, to put it more in the legal definition, is conduct that's purposely undertaken, calculated to cause harm, and is in conscious disregard of the consequences or rights or safety of others. And as I probably mentioned it last year, I just call it bad stuff, right? And we don't, yes, ma'am.
Oh, I'm just curious.
Councilmember Trujillo,
Yeah.
please.
I'm just curious if you've seen any cases relating to like social media and maybe like an elected official making defamatory statements against constituents.
We've seen a little bit of that. There becomes a question of whether that's an action for, we're kind of jumping around on my slide, so I'll try to remember where we're hitting on some things. But the question, part of that becomes, is this social media activity within or outside of the scope of my duties as an elected official, right? To the extent we see a claim where the claimant wants to hold the person accountable as a public official, right? We'll get a notice of claim that says something like, that public official wearing their cloak of officialdom intentionally defamed me. And in that situation, if it's determined, if I'm able to prove my case, then you don't get the benefit of the Governmental Immunity Act. There's no immunity, the limits don't apply, and I'm going to hold you individually and personally liable. Right? Yeah. So we see claimants attempt to make that claim or make that accusation.
Thank you.
Yeah. Hopefully you never get to this point. Knock on wood, once in a while I've had situations. We had a defamation claim of one elected official against another. That was kind of a hard one to sort out because the question became, were they fighting with each other in their official capacity or their personal capacity? These all implicate insurance issues that I'm going to talk about in a second, right? We have other claims once in a while where there's alleged tortious interference with business relations, defamation, false publication. So let me stop there and get back on track because it's going to tie into federal civil rights penalty in a second. So I will say on the willful and wanton side, we don't get too many claims a year, but every once in a while we do get either a notice of claim or an actual lawsuit where the claimant is alleging that an elected or appointed official or employee engaged in willful and wanton conduct. And the fact pattern is almost always a situation where the person is alleging that the government official or employee, was acting individually. And the way we look at it from the claims perspective is they were acting individually. The allegation is that they were misperceiving that they had some governmental authority that they actually didn't have, right? And they're throwing on a purported cloak of governmental authority and trying to do bad things to people for the wrong reasons. To give you a couple of more examples that can be risky from a personal liability standpoint, and I've got some more on a later slide. Let's say your code of ethics says that, and to every reasonable person, it's a conflict of interest. You have to recuse yourself, but you decide, well, I'm gonna sweep that under the rug. I'm not gonna let anybody know about it. I'm gonna keep this clear conflict to myself so that I can stay in there and make sure that that applicant who's in front of us doesn't get approval. And the reason why is because they're my business competitor or something like that. Sounds like bad stuff, right? That kind of thing. Or maybe conscripting a staff member who's not looking at something the right way and going on a campaign to make sure that my business competitor's business license gets revoked, right? But they don't get building permits for that project. You can see this is all bad stuff, right? So the silver lining to all this is, from an individual liability standpoint, as long as we're staying within the scope of our role as council members, right, and not getting outside of our lane, we're going to be fine on the scope of employment. And on the willful and wanton, right, as long as we make sure we're acting in good faith and not doing the wrong things for the wrong reason, these immunity protections are going to be there to protect us. Yeah, scope of employment example, we don't see many of them, but it can happen. You know, what if a council or elected official gets crosswise with the rest of the council and misperceives that they have individual authority to go out and negotiate and enter into contracts that clearly would otherwise require council approval? That's kind of that's outside the job description. Nonetheless creates a potential risk, right? Or we're going to talk about this more in a minute. What about, does any one member of the council have the authority to discipline or fire an employee? No. Yeah, that's a scope of employment concept, right? And the good news we're going to talk about in a minute is with regard to that kind of liability risk, employment practices liability risk, by your charter and by your organizational structure, you gave all that risk to your manager. What a great place to be from your perspective, right? Because you're protected from that risk as long as you understand that's not in our lane, right? Okay. Yeah. All right. Was there anything else you wanted to mention at that point on it? Let's talk about federal civil rights liability, and thank you for the question because it does tie into this. So the second rail where there's liability exposure for you in the city is under federal law. The primary path to civil rights liability against public officials is the statute that I've noted here was passed back in the 1870s. And it basically says every person, see how it says person? The primary target is a person. Entities can be liable if they're a moving force behind the violation, but a lot of times the claimant goes after the individual, right? It says every person who under color of law deprives a person of the rights protected by the federal Constitution or federal statute is liable in an action at law. That really means that what the person can do is if they think you've individually or collectively as elected officials violated their civil rights, they can bring an action against you, okay? So it's a little weird phraseology there, but there's only two elements to the statute. There has to be action under color of law, and it has to violate a constitutional or other federally protected right. When you're wearing your city official hat, all the actions and things that you do, you're acting under color of law, right? So the real question becomes, is there a violation, right? The kinds of claims that we see in this area where claimants are trying to pursue federal liability for which there is no caps are things like First Amendment, civil rights violation. Give you a real easy example of that, starting with collective action of a council. You have public comment periods, right? Yeah. 3 minutes? I see it on the thing. I get 3 minutes. If I come up and I start saying things and all of a sudden you don't like them, don't like what I'm saying, there's Citizen Sam, and geez, not him again. 30 seconds into it, I'm engaging in a personal attack on you. Can we, individually or collectively direct the sergeant at arms or whoever's the law enforcement room? Cut the mic and take him out of the room. No. Yeah, it's a First Amendment violation, right? Yeah. Even if 30 seconds into it, you can't stand what I'm saying, I get another 2.5 minutes unless I'm inciting a riot or engaging in sexualized, obscene speech, right? Yeah, that's just part of it, right? Other risks around civil rights, the Fourth Amendment, things like search, seizure, warrant violations, those are more law enforcement risks. Fifth Amendment, 14th Amendment can attach to the actions of elected or appointed officials. Sometimes you ever hear this in a land use proceeding, maybe you're about to deny the application and the applicant says, if you turn down my application, you're violating my constitutional rights, that's a taking of my property. Right? So probably not. It would have to be a pretty extreme case, but that's a liability risk where they could bring an action against the council and its members trying to hold you liable for a taking, right? Now, that type of claim it actually is not covered by insurance. Taking claims are not covered by insurance. But it's the kind of action that doesn't really attach to you individually because it's, in my scenario there, it's attacking the decision of the council, okay? So let's use an example that might attach to an individual. Let's go back to social media, right? And we're going to talk a little bit more about this later. But you probably read a lot in the newspapers about allegations of constitutional rights violations because an elected or appointed official blocked someone on social media, right? So there's a lot of hubbub around this issue. The Supreme Court actually recently raised the bar for the claimant, so it's harder to hold you liable, right? But if you have a social media site that you admittedly use as your government social media site, and you're speaking as a governmental official, and you're purporting to speak on subjects that you have authority to speak about, and you're actually attempting to exercise that authority through social media, but then you get in the comment thread, you know, somebody gives you a snarky comment, you don't like it, and you say, I'm not going to listen to that person anymore. I'm going to block them or remove their content. That's a potential civil rights violation, right? Because the First Amendment says, you know, we got to, if we treat this room or our social media as some type of public forum, then we got to listen to the bad with the good. And we can't, as governmental actors, right, engage in activities that violate people's First Amendment rights around that issue, right? So getting back on track, so federal.
Sorry.
Oh, go ahead. Oh, I'm sorry, yes.
Just slide deck.
Yep. There we go. Yes, you had a question.
I have a question regarding, just for clarification. So as in example that you provided regarding public comment, a real good example would be one that we've encountered where we have had public comment and individuals have claimed that we are going to get sued because we violated their constitutional right in regards to flock surveillance. There is no claim on that. I mean, I would presume, correct?
We don't have any yet. Okay?
Was that knock on wood?
That's knock on wood. That's knock on wood. That's a hot trending
Well,
topic.
didn't Boulder, isn't Boulder getting sued right now?
Yeah, they're not a member. Yeah,
Oh.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, and so it's going to be, you know, and the claimed constitutional theories of liability is going to be our government's gathering and using data from flock in a way that violates warrant requirements or that violates constitutional rights to privacy, whether arguably under federal constitution or implied privacy right. So
Can you speak up a little bit? Sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry. So that's going to play itself out. That's definitely a hot trending topic. There was even legislation in the legislature this year. We don't have any currently pending claims on that issue at CIRSA, but we expect there'll be one. Yeah.
So if it's a collective decision versus any kind of individual in regards to federal civil rights liability.
Yeah.
Because this one is specifically saying like individual, right?
Right.
So collectively.
Yeah, a civil rights claim against you collectively, it's possible to, essentially mistakenly or negligently violate someone's constitutional rights. Let's say you pass, do you agree some of the work you do is kind of cutting edge, right? You're dealing with issues where these issues are swirling and we got to make a decision, whatever it may be. Oil and gas regulation, short-term rental regulation, you name it, right? Housing legislation, and there's many different sides of those issues, and people on one side of it may say, if you do this, I think what you're doing under that ordinance, that legislative action is violating my constitutional rights, right? You can imagine the liabilities, the conversation if someone tried to sue, one individual for that. Like, you pass your ordinance and the person stands up and says, I'm so mad about this, I'm going to sue for constitutional violation, I'm going to sue just you. You go, well, wait a second, I just one of 9 members of the council that cast a vote, right? So it's very important from a risk management perspective to recognize their safety in numbers, and also that elected officials do their work primarily by meeting together as a group and making decisions collectively as the council on matters that come in front of you. And hopefully agrees with me on this notion. There's also additional protections against liability when you're doing that work collectively in this room. For example, there's a higher level of immunity for legislative activities when we're getting together doing our legislative activity, right? Or when we're making tough land use decisions, there's another layer of quasi-judicial immunity, right? But if we find ourselves individually and inappropriately getting involved, particularly in personnel or administrative matters that are not within our lane, that's where there's greater exposure, right? Yeah. Is that
Thank
helpful?
you.
Mayor Pro Tem Noble.
Thank you. Sam, if you just pull the microphone closer to your
I'm so
mouth,
sorry.
it would be, then you can go up and down and up and down.
There we go.
Yeah, there you go.
All right. Thank you.
But even if that was the case, let's say someone did sue. So the question is, does the city then protect the city council members for their vote as opposed to not protecting them?
If it's a covered claim,
On, for example, what Councilmember Sandoval was talking about, that if there is a vote and someone comes up and says, you violated my rights,
right,
and they go ahead and they sue,
right,
because anybody can sue,
yeah.
would the city defend them, or would the council members have to have their own attorneys?
Yeah, the city, well, let's start with the easy one.
It would be in a public setting. It would be making a public body decision.
Right.
So I'm thinking the city would represent the council members.
Correct, but if it's a covered claim, that's why you have insurance, right?
Right.
The second half of your liability coverage, there's the first part of the liability coverage covers the hard types of claims, the property damage, the personal injury, bodily injury type claim. The second part of your coverage is what we call the wrongful acts coverage, public officials liability coverage. And it includes coverage through CIRSA for alleged wrongful acts, including an alleged error or omission or alleged violation of constitutional rights. Now, there are some exclusions to that. For example, as I mentioned, a takings claim is excluded. But if someone said, well, you just passed that ordinance regulating whatever it may be, oil and gas or something like that, and I think in doing so, you violated constitutional principles of equal protection or due process, then that ends up getting turned into CIRSA as a covered claim, right? We then, the insurance contract essentially says it's a covered claim, you use CIRSA. For defense of covered claims, we then assign defense attorneys and work closely with your team to defend against that litigation, right? That makes sense? You have a financial stake in that because you have a deductible, right? So your deductible applies first, and then CIRSA is responsible for the loss adjusting expense. And then in our world, we call it the covered ultimate net loss. And that's the actual pot of money that falls within the definition of that term for which your insurance coverage would then pay, right, that cost.
So I think the big takeaway here, Sam, is particularly bullet 3 and bullet 4, right?
Yeah.
Which is there is qualified immunity that will protect elected officials, both in state and federal civil rights liability claims, so long as they are acting reasonably in good faith and they're generally operating within the scope of their employment. I think that's the biggest takeaway. Whether or not the city would defend is largely fact specific, but we would start with the point of council was likely operating within the purview of its roles. We would digest that claim. We would likely bring in risk department through HR and then over to CIRSA. That's how we typically handle those matters. But I just want to make sure that everyone understands, right, the reason why we have qualified immunity as a legal doctrine in this country is to afford us the opportunity to have a fruitful and protective democratic process, because none of you would be doing this if you could be sued and based on every decision that you make. We would never have an elected body. So there is defenses here for your protection.
Yeah, it's essentially a good faith defense, right? And as noted on the slide, it basically says you're immune, right? As long as you are not violating, clearly established rights of which you should have known. And that's like intentionally, So I always thought the most interesting phrase in the qualified immunity defense is just developing a good risk radar around the question, would have known, should have known, right? Because sometimes you'll be asking yourself, well, this person's, alleging we're violating the constitutional rights. How do I know, right? And that's why your team is there to support you, right? And so in terms of minimizing the risk for the council and the city, it's just simply having a risk radar of saying, okay, we got a situation where the claimant is, or the applicant or the developer or the citizen is saying this. Let's just make sure we slow it down a little bit and get some input from our team on what does this risk exposure really look like, okay? Yeah. With regard, just wrapping up some of the insurance aspects. So your insurance coverage provides for both defense and indemnity. To go to your question, Mayor Pro Tem, the question of assignment of defense counsel. So the insurance principle is the duty to defend is broader than the duty to indemnify. So if we get a claim and there are any allegations that suggest it relates to your role as a public official, right? And it appears that it's a covered claim, then we will assign a defense attorney for you, right? The odd thing that you'll see is if they make allegations, let's say it's a mix of covered claims, ones that are clearly covered, but then they allege things like, oh, this elected or appointed official went way outside their lane, and they were intentionally trying to harm my rights, and I want to hold them personally liable. We'll send out a reservation of rights letter that reminds the official there are some exclusions for which there would not be coverage. But frankly, in our many decades of doing this, we have very few, if any, liability claims that go all the way to a jury with an attempted exposure for an individual elected appointed official where the jury is going to be the one to decide whether there's liability for willful and wanton conduct. Why is that? Right? Because it's a mix of covered and uncovered claims, and it's a bad situation. Then in our world, those kind of bad situations, they're not like wine. They don't get better as we go through the litigation process. They don't age well with time. So we try to get those resolved, right? And that's an important piece of that. And we work with the risk managers and city attorneys to figure out what the exposure looks like. As you well know, reaching an amicable settlement is all about what's reasonable, however, right? So sometimes we have to struggle with that issue as well, right? So as your city attorney said so well, the bottom line of this is that you're well protected as long as we're acting in good faith and staying within our lane, right? And another way I put it is if we know individually as council or council collectively that if we're doing the right thing for the right reasons in good faith and we're doing it through fair and defensible processes, then our liability exposures both collectively and individually will be very few and far between. It's always the case, particularly more recently it seems like always going to be the case. You can't stop somebody from attempting to sue, but we get a lot of those claims that were easily disposed of, right? So in fact, in this day and age, we get a lot more times where people submit a notice of claim or submit a claim and then they just abandon it once they understand there's no exposure here, right? And those claims will just go away for not much cost, right? Okay. Any questions on that piece?
Sam, I had a question. So
Yeah.
if you post something on social media, public notice, can you turn off the comments, start out with, so there is no comments?
Yeah, I think you can do that. I'll look to your city attorney if he's got further comments, but the way I would characterize it is just like a light switch, you can have it completely on or completely off, but do not flick the light switch on and off. And then you'll be in a good spot.
Agreed, yes, and that is contemplated in your social media policy that council previously approved.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. On this next slide, I just kind of organized some of the actual risk exposures, and where the liability risks lie for elected and appointed officials. The first two at the top, those are what I would call the high-profile, difficult to settle emotional claims where positions get entrenched pretty quickly. The first one is the potential exposure that elected officials could create by a decision. I'm not saying that anybody gets a claim that has traction, but that's where we see people bringing challenges to decisions of city councils. The second one, the good news is, employment practices liability claims are pretty routine among all of our members, but the good news is, as long as we embrace the idea that that's not in our lane and we're not responsible for the employment practices except for your 3 direct reports. You have 3 direct reports, city manager, judge, and city attorney. Then that's an employment practices exposure that you don't see, right? But we'll talk more about it in just a minute. The next 2, alleged willful and wanton conduct and breach of ethics, those are the outliers that truly could become a individual personal liability for which there is no defense and indemnity obligation if it's a bad situation, right? Like breach of your code of ethics, right? The city and CIRSA would not have an obligation to defend or indemnify against that. The next 3 ones have to do with challenges against process, open meetings violation, or the decision that you make, that fancy number there. That's basically the type of state claim that someone can bring to basically say that some sort of land use decision or other quasi-judicial decision you made was arbitrary. You didn't follow your own standards or rules that guide the decision-making process, okay? Here's some real-world situations where elected appointed officials can expose themselves to potential individual uncovered liability. I think we talked about most of them when we went through your questions earlier, but let's see. Let me make sure I get in the right spot. There you go. Code of ethics, criminal conduct or malicious conduct, conduct outside the scope of authority, you know, exercising some authority that you don't have. Willful and wanton conduct we've talked about. Sexual harassment, sexual abuse, individual bad actor can have individual liability, and then retaliation risk, right? That's the misuse of governmental authority to retaliate against someone for engaging in protected activity. So these are the high-profile liability risks. They come up, they're there, but they're not the routine risks that we deal with. Again, our bread and butter for all of our members, including you, is the property damage, the auto physical damage claim, some employment practices, the slip and falls, that kind of stuff. But these are the ones that we should be aware of, right? Just make sure you have a good risk radar. If something doesn't, if it feels like this is getting a little risky, or if you ever had indulged the idea that I'd like to do this on behalf of the city, but it feels a little risky to me, you want to check in with your city attorney and go, is this, if you ever have a question, is this or that course of conduct okay for me as a city official? Please check in with your city attorney. They're there to help you, keep you out of harm's way, protect you, right? So they'll be none too happy to give you their thoughts from their perspective as a city attorney, right, on where the trouble spots lie and what might be the appropriate thing to do from where you sit, okay? All right, just talking a little bit more broadly about some risk management principles. Again, understand the scope of employment. It's absolutely the case in every municipal organization, no matter how large or small, that you as the council and you as an organization, by your charter, by your ordinances, by state statute, have allocated authority and responsibility to all the different arms of the organization. You have to think about, what's our council role? What's my role both individually and collectively, right? As I mentioned, it is a we job. So if you're thinking in terms of hey, council, I don't like what you've done, I'm going to do this. It's a risky situation, right? And then recognize that it's absolutely the case, and you read about it all the time in the papers, that bad legal exposure cases can get worse if there are bad facts suggesting that we acted in less than a measured way. Might be a way of putting it. Yes?
Could you give examples of the we, not I bullet point that you have seen in the state of Colorado or elsewhere?
Yeah. Let me borrow the example of split vote, and I'll give you two live claim situations that I've had in the past. You have a split vote on something. Maybe it's you make decisions on development applications, right? Okay. Yes. Yeah, I had I know you're a 9-member board, but I had a 4-3 split on a development application, and the development was approved, and you sometimes approve subject to conditions, right? So this one was approved subject to conditions. So basically the governing body saying, we approve your development project subject to conditions. One of the conditions is you got to go to the neighbor and get an easement for secondary access. That's a pretty common thing. And the neighbor was even at the hearing and said, I'll negotiate. That seems reasonable. Well, somebody on the 3 side of the 4-3 vote just couldn't let it go. And so afterwards went to the neighbor to do what? Convince him not to grant the easement. That sound like a good idea? Nope. Yeah, the actual liability exposure was the person said, look, you and your fellow elected officials just approved my development. You were part of the body that just did that. And by your vote, even though you voted no, by the voice that matters, the governing body said, I get this approval. You had a role in giving me that expected, right, business expectation. Yes. And here you are now thinking that you can take off your elected official hat and try and interfere with my effectuation of the conditions that you just had a hand in. So it was a very interesting question, because you can't interfere with your own contract, but can one individual tortiously interfere with some other party's expected business advantage? So that's a little nuanced one, but here's another one that's a little easier. Split vote on hiring a consultant. You hired an appraiser earlier tonight wearing a different hat, but somebody on the downside of one of those votes, for some reason, didn't like the vendor and just couldn't let it go. So now starts publicly at each meeting questioning all the invoices, starts criticizing that consultant or vendor's business practices. In the vendor or consultant's mind, hey, you're making false accusations about me. In fact, you're making intentional false statements about my business. Here's my notice of intent to pursue you individually for defamation. Knowing publication of intentionally false facts with intent to harm. That can be an individual liability exposure. Yep. Other ones we see is sometimes if we get out of our lane and we make statements that, again, you only have 3 direct reports, so embrace that, right? But sometimes I've seen notices of claim where elected or appointed officials take an unhealthy interest in an employment matter, and they start speaking publicly about an employee that they have no authority over, and what's the employee think? They're making false statements about me, or they're harming my reputation or damaging my ability to get future employment, right? That can all translate into what they call a liberty interest claim.
Quick question. So going back to your consultant example, right? Presumably that was a client municipality of yours. Did CIRSA make the determination that that claim was outside of the insurance coverage?
Well, we got it resolved. The duty to defend is broader than the duty to indemnify. So, but because the allegations that the person was doing this wearing their elected official hat, we had a duty to indemnify. Sometimes results in difficult conversations with our members, but not always. We try as much as we humanly can to be in lockstep with our members. But sometimes there can be a frustration in that situation. Because imagine, right, the organization says, bar another example, what if the allegation is wearing their government hat, they engaged in malicious acts almost to the point of criminal activity, but there are enough allegations there to trigger defense. Our members telling us, we don't want to defend that person, but we may have an obligation to do so, right? But if the civil liability flows from willful and wanton conduct or malicious acts or criminal acts, right? Intentional defamation would be one. We might have to defend that defamation case, but if it turns out those were intentionally published false facts that the individual, right? And the individual they're outside their lane too, because they had no authority to administer the contract, right? That could be one where ultimately we wouldn't pay the judgment. So summing that all up, it's a good reminder that if you've given away authority to staff to be responsible for something, yes, you may have had some involvement in the decision at some point in time, you awarded the contract, but once you've done that, your part of the job is over, right? If you do have any concerns concerning an administrative matter, you just reach out to your manager, right? But you want to make sure you give the manager some grace when he says, I got it, because it's an administrative matter, and he truly does have it, right? Because that's part of his job, right? Okay. Let me move forward with a couple other things. That probably builds on just this. I'm going to treat this as a summary slide. So this adherence to organizational structure is critically important aspect of your scope of employment, particularly as it relates to employee relations and handling administrative matters assigned to staff. So as was mentioned, you as the council have only 3 direct reports: the manager, the attorney, and the judge. And from your perspective, as the citizen, part-time, volunteer policymakers and legislators, I would encourage you to embrace that. Love it, right? Because that means you've shifted responsibility for all personnel administrative matters and all the attendant risk to your manager and to supervisors downstream of the manager, right? Some of this is even embedded in your charter, I believe, and in your council policies that talk about council contacts with administrative staff, right? But I will tell you, once in a while, we have employment practices liability claims where an individual elected or appointed official takes an unhealthy interest in that personnel matter that involves some employee below in the organization. And the claimant thinks that that elected or appointed official is a material witness for the claim. And we have to take their deposition or interview them and say, hey, you know, there are allegations that say you promised this to the employee or you said this to the employee, and that's part of their theory of their claim against the city. And I've never had an elected official whose deposition we took for an employment practices claim ever come back to me at CIRSA and say, well, that was a lot of fun, let's do it again, right? That's why the system's in place. It's to protect you from employment practices liability risk. So learn to love that. And I'm not naive on it. I know that pressure can come from inside or outside. You know, what if a citizen, you know, they come to City Hall, they have an interaction with staff, they didn't like the interaction, what's their natural inclination? I'm gonna call my elected official, you gotta do something about that employee. And you are gonna do something about it, but what would that be? Gonna tell manager, I just heard this from a citizen or an employee, and the first thing you wanted to say to the citizen, I think, is, have you talked to our manager? Might be the first and only thing you want to say, right? Have you talked to our manager? Because I, as an elected official, we as a council, we're not responsible and don't get involved in personnel matters for the city. And the citizen says, well, what do you mean I can't approach my elected official? Who's accountable here? No, we're approachable and we're responsive and we're available, but not on these matters. We do have systems in place for the manager, right? So you have to be careful of that. Sometimes citizens want to conscript you, right, into doing something that would be outside your scope of employment. Or they have a frustrating interaction from their perspective with some administrative matter that they got going on, a building permit or a license or something, and they want to conscript you into doing an end run around the city processes. But in many, many circumstances, who are the legislators that adopted that process in the first case? You all. Yeah, so be a champion of the processes in place, right? Yeah, we get a bad rap sometimes in local government. Oh, it's such a process, right? But process is intentional, right? It's there to ensure that people are treated fairly, that there are consistent and defensible standards that apply. So when a citizen comes to you and says, you know, can you help me with this administrative matter? You want to have a ready response to that too. You know, it says, no, I don't have authority to deal with that individually, but we have good systems in place. We get you together with our manager or whoever the case may be, and then your manager can direct them to the right
I think
folks.
just one small nuance, which I believe council knows, is if there are issues with staff attorneys
Yeah.
or anyone under my purview, certainly let me know.
Yes.
Yes.
Or the judge. Or the judge.
Judge, go straight to the judge.
Yes. But, you know, not to be too glib about it, but you're going to have that ready response to when the citizen calls you up and says, I got a ticket in the court. What are you going to do about it? Well, that's why we have a court system. So we're not going to do anything about it. You know, so be careful of that. Make sure that you establish and your council policies talk about these things, but embrace that process that you've established in collaboration with management, right? About how matters are brought forward, about administrative matters, you know, whether they're questions or concerns raised by you or the citizens. Just embrace the idea and dissuade people of the expectation that, you know, sometimes citizens have a understandable but mistaken view that the individual council members are kind of their individual fixers. They come to you and say, I want you to get this done for me, you know, and I get the pressure that you're under to be accountable and open to your citizens, but it can be a real path to administrative chaos, to games of telephone, who said what, when, to potential the controversy getting even worse, right? Or to claims, right? So be careful of that. With regard to your interactions with staff, do take a look at that council administrative rule, or the CP 17, council contacts with administrative personnel. You know, and be cognizant of perceptions, because you do imagine the perception of you going to a staff member, even if it's something that is just, hey, I'd like to see this, right? Right. The charter and the policy say the council members don't give direction to staff, right? But perceptions matter, right? So be cognizant of that issue as well, because but you have an outlet, you have a place of accountability and contact for that, and what is that? Your manager. right? So if you have concerns about an administrative matter, you take that to the manager. So, okay. Oops, sorry. Let me make sure I'm caught up with where I need to be on the slides. I think we covered all those. Let's talk about transparency risk real quickly, particularly for the new members, but we all know this, probably a refresher. Just remember under the open meetings law, there's a couple of requirements there. I just want to touch on the one that's kind of the rising trend in our world at CIRSA. So you know that the open meetings law says that whenever 3 or more members of the council meet to discuss public business, that has to be open to the public, okay? Right, it doesn't apply to a one-on-one meeting, but the rising trend in the claims that we're seeing is alleged serial meetings, right? The allegation is it's not 3 at one time, but it's one-on-one, elected or appointed officials through a series of one-on-one meetings, working things out in advance, figuring out how they're going to vote, right? Such that the way it really looks in the claims context is what the claimant is actually saying is, I have evidence that shows the decision was taken or made or arrived at outside of the council meeting through a series of one-on-one discussions, and what happened at the council meeting was a mere rubber stamping of a decision that was reached by some improper process. So that's a rising trend in our world. We want to be very careful of that. It's your responsibility to self-police on that, right? For the new members, hey, one-on-one meeting, you know, with a fellow elected official to get to know each other is just fine, right? Just don't do it on quasi-judicial matters. We'll talk more about that if you like, but it's, we all in good sense know that, you know, it's not, you can't call each other individually and say, hey, it's a tough issue coming up next week. How are you going to vote? Let me call council members Sam and Joe and Sally, and we'll all figure out where the votes lie. It's getting easier and easier for plaintiffs to ferret out evidence of that, and they're none too happy to make those claims. Yeah. Yes.
So based on what I'm reading right here,
Yeah.
technically, if there was a public meeting, such as those that we host, just to engage with the community,
Yeah.
there could be 3, as long as there's no action taken, as long as we're not making decisions, right? And it's noticed.
Yeah. So the legal advice that I've given is err on the side of conservative, right? So if you know that there's going to be more than 2 members of a public body, including your boards and commission members, then we should notice it. We work with the clerk's office to proactively say, at an upcoming meeting, there may be more than 2 members of this a public body. We've actually also now started noting there will not be public business or there will not be a formal action decided, but at least then we are clarifying to everyone there may be more than 2 members and that there may be public business discussed. I think that is the far more protective way of the city. I did want to clarify something that Sam mentioned about the serial meetings, and he's saying there's a rise in litigation on this front, so certainly would highlight that we should be very careful and mindful of that. I do think that that is distinguishable. I'd love to get your thoughts here, Sam. I do think that that is distinguishable from examples for Suncor or other businesses that would like to have, you know, a meeting with 2 members to talk about their operations where there is not a formal decision that's being made by city council. I think that is appropriate because there's not any formal action that's going to take place. That is very different than council member A texts council member B and says, my vote's thumbs up. Council member B texts council member C and says, my vote's up, right? That's the serial meeting example that he's referring to.
Yeah.
Got it. Thank you.
Yep, yep. Yeah, and the openness requirement, it has to be 3 or more. So 2 meetings is fine. And the claim, thank you for that clarification, the claim exposure is the plaintiff is alleging that the action was already taken before I got to the meeting. That essentially, again, it's a mere rubber stamping. So, yeah, it implies that the 2 concept of 2 meeting can apply either externally or internally, right? The question sometimes comes up, well, what if the 2 of us want to meet with the city manager? Does that have to be an open meeting? no, because administrative staff is not counted.
Sorry, I had somebody ask a question recently about, well, how come it's 3 in Commerce City? Why is it 3 in Commerce City and in Denver it's something different? And that's basically or quorum, right? Is that where the numbers differ?
My understanding is under state statute, it's 3 for local municipalities and it's 2 for state government. Is that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's 3 or more, or a quorum, whichever is less. So
Whatever's
not really
less,
applicable,
okay.
but let's say
Okay.
you formally created a city council committee that exists, that is comprised of 3 members, and you delegated to that committee some decision-making function. You know, a small finance committee of 3 people. Now the rules apply to them just like they do to the council, except the openness requirement would now apply when 2 of those committee members get together, because it's 3 or more, or a quorum, whichever is fewer. So, sorry to confuse things, I just wanted to make sure.
Oh, no, it was
That's
just, no, it was something that recently
Yeah.
came to me and I was like, oh, that's a good question.
Yep.
Because it sounded like it was different in another jurisdiction, so.
Yeah. Now, I just want to get on your radar too, one other thing, not to confuse matters, but there's a little bit of an urban legend out there as related to the state. But I want to start it by mentioning this. Remember that this rule, a meeting for purposes of this rule is any kind of gathering, whether it's in person, by phone, or by electronic means, right? So that's why staff has reminded you when you use email to talk to each other, don't have 3 or more of you on an email thread having a discussion, excuse me, of the merits or substance of some pending matter of public business before the council, right?
Sam, this body does an excellent job at not doing that. There's obviously the exception to the need to schedule things.
Yeah.
And even in those instances, we've been very mindful to not do so.
So you're in a good spot. Make good use of email. That's what the last ad is about, that I put at your place, is discusses some of the risks. But just don't use email to have a deliberation or to discuss public business. You'll be in a good spot. The urban legend that I wanted to dispel is some of my local government elected officials have said, well, is that really true? Because I've been hearing that it doesn't really apply to all of our discussions, and that's true. Certain discussions aren't covered, like scheduling and availability and a couple of other things. Just so you know, the state legislature had some problems around this a couple of years ago. And they did a little bit of self-policing around their messaging each other on electronic messaging apps. They admitted they made a mistake. They said they weren't going to do it again. And then the following year in the state legislature, they went in and loosened some of these rules as applied to the state legislature, not as applied to local government. So if you're hearing something like, oh, you know, it's okay, you know, 3 or more of you can discuss this or that, and it's not an open meeting, make sure you check in with your city attorney. So I've heard this a couple of times since the state legislature had its little hubbub over that, and I needed to correct that the rules were loosened for the state legislature, but not for you all. Okay. It's on the bottom of the slide, but I'm sure you're in a good spot. Just an executive session reminder. Just remember, for executive sessions, right, we all stay on the same page about protecting confidential information. We're all legal fiduciaries of the city through our role on council, and no one of us should leak information from an executive session. That would be contrary to our fiduciary responsibility, right? And then just make sure when we're in executive session, we're self-policing of staying on topic, right? We can only discuss the topic that was announced in the executive session. I guess my last piece of practical advice on executive sessions is, you know, under Colorado law, have you participated in an executive session yet? There's a tape recording being made of the executive session, except if the attorney asks that the tape recording be turned off. That's the only one and only circumstance under state law where you can turn the tape off, is to protect a privileged attorney-client communication. In my practical world, that means, remember, there's a tape recording being made. Very hard for people to get a hold of that tape, but sometimes they do. particularly in scorched earth litigation. So just like in the open session, courtesy, tact, appropriate tone and temperament, staying on topic, mutual respect, all that matters in an executive session discussion, because I have had risks, profiles, risk claim exposure be expanded because there were a couple of zingers comments made, on an executive session tape that we ended up having to give to the plaintiffs, right? So we want to make sure we don't want to have our names attached to a zinger that makes a bad case worse. Yes?
Would you say the executive sessions probably take the cake for most lawsuits or not?
Around the open meetings, around alleged open meetings violations, yes, yeah. But it's a couple of different things. The claim sometimes is an alleged technical violation of the announcement rules. You didn't make the proper statement before you went into executive session, right? The one that's much more difficult for us in defending liability claims is if there is an individual participant in the executive session who went out and shared confidential information, and that became material to defensive litigation. Then we have, and I have several claims right now where our litigators are battling against, in an effort to help the defense for the entity, are battling against a claim that the privilege has been waived because individual participants in the executive session went out and leaked confidential discussions. If you were a plaintiff's attorney, why wouldn't you argue, hey, somebody leaked or shared your confidential discussions with your attorneys, and I get to hear all of it now. I'd love to hear that as a plaintiff's attorney. I wouldn't want it out there as a defense trying to reduce the claims exposure, right? Yeah, so just remember, we're all legal fiduciaries. I think it's our obligation to get on the same page about that issue. And I think a good way to get on the same page is before you leave executive session, it's the mayor, if he's leading the discussion, or whoever, we say, all right, of all the confidential information that we've discussed in this executive session, which information, if any, leaves this room, and who's our spokesperson? And now, as the 9 council members, we're all on the same page, right? And that can be frustrating sometimes to an individual member. Well, there's nothing, we're not going to share anything at this point. Well, I want us to be more transparent. Is my remedy then to go out and leak that information? What's my remedy? It's to continue to talk with my colleagues about, isn't there something we can collectively, as a council, decide to share about this topic that we've been discussing in executive session? So.
Just to add to that, in my experience, the vast majority of litigation that I've seen from open meetings challenges are the procedural aspect of getting into an executive session. So
Yeah.
there are a lot of municipalities that don't appreciate fully that they need to fully cite the statutory provision that allows them the right to have a confidential conversation. The recording aspect is also one. And then really to make sure that we're staying within the confines of the scope of the stated executive session. That is hugely important.
And I agree with that. Those technical violations are a product of the risk exposure, is a product of the fact that you're very transparent and that almost anyone in the state has standing. It used to be the idea of like, wait a second, you mean to tell me that someone can bring a claim challenging our compliance with those technical announcements and they don't have to be a citizen? No. They don't have to have any stake in the matter being discussed? No. And we have claimants who are either attorneys or citizen watchdogs who listen to meeting tapes, look at minutes, and they're none too happy to send a letter in. Your staff does a lot of this for you. They make sure you check all the boxes. What we can do just collectively to help manage that risk is we should never feel hesitant to speak up if if something didn't sound right. Okay, we got the motion in a second. Are we good? Just double check one more time, because once you call for that vote and you cast your vote and you go into executive session, you really don't get a do-over. But staff is policing that closely for you, and I'm sure you do a great job on the things you have to announce.
Councilmember Sandoval?
Yeah.
What is the process, or have you seen situations where there are discussions in executive session and the conversations are clearly shared outside, and it becomes known that that's the case, and there was never a discussion about what, if anything, or nothing at all was going to even be disclosed, how would that be addressed?
Well, I think you have to start from and I'll turn to the city attorney in a second. You have to start from the presumption that if we cast a vote to go into executive session, then we wanted our discussion to be confidential. That's the
Right.
whole point of the executive session. So I think the starting point is the executive session itself is the adoption of the council of the position that everything discussed here is confidential. I don't know if you have a local rule that also kicks in, but that's just sort of the base principle of it, right? Is the executive session is not a public discussion. It's the agreement of the council that we're going to discuss something confidentially.
We do have a local rule. It's under a council policy that it should all remain confidential, right? So it's under the council policies that have already been adopted.
Mayor.
Sam, a question. Who has access to those recordings?
The statute provides that if a claimant has some initial level of evidence suggesting that the discussion in executive session went off topic, then they can file a legal claim and ask the judge to review the tape, usually in chambers, and then the judge will make a determination of whether you stayed off topic or stayed on topic or went off topic. If the judge rules that you went off topic, then at least the portion that was off topic becomes a public record. Some judges take the position that the whole thing then is open, but.
But a citizen couldn't. Is that
Well, the
would that be a
citizen can be
quorum?
your claimant.
Okay.
Yeah, so just to be clear, I think there's a distinction between the legal process and a judicial decision comparative to a KORA request, right? If a KORA request were to come in, we certainly would take the position that that's confidential under the privilege that's allowed under the CRS. That would be the starting point, absolutely.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah.
Thank you.
I missed a meeting as an executive session last year, and because I did, I had a meeting with the city manager and the city attorney where they explained to me what had taken place during the executive session. I would assume that is, I shouldn't use that word, that would seem to be good practice to do when you miss a meeting, that you get apprised by the city attorney and city manager, or what is the best way to handle it when you are not present for the executive session?
I've seen different practices. You know, some of our members, the practice would be that the member who was absent can come to the city or town office and listen to the recording there, the debrief. But again, it's all confidential, right? I think those are probably the two main ones that I've seen. And so I don't know if you have further.
That's the same practice that we've had for the last 2 years that I've been here. So if there's a council member that's absent and they want to understand what their body discussed in an executive session, they have a right to listen to that or to be debriefed on it. To Sam's point, I think it is certainly best practice to not provide that electronically, right? Because then it's out there. If it gets shared, then people start pointing fingers, et cetera. So I would certainly always recommend, if you are not available and you want to know what transpired, then you come down to the Civic Building. We will make sure that you have access to watching that video.
Oh, okay, so you can listen then, or watch.
Correct.
Oh, okay. That'd be good.
Just to clarify, even if you're absent, you still have a right to know.
Correct.
Thank you.
Yeah, and those recordings are kept for 90 days under the statute, and then they're deleted on the 91st day, hopefully, unless obviously the clear exception being if the city attorney advises staff that this, or you all, that this recording must be maintained for a longer period because of some pending or threatened litigation, then they deal with that issue. Yeah. Yes.
Could they be debriefed by another council member? Or does it have to be city attorney, city manager, or listening to?
Well, I like the
What is the
debrief with
definition
the
of
city
debrief?
attorney present if it's a legal issue, so that the attorney-client privilege is clearly maintained. If two of you discuss a matter without the city attorney present, it's, does attorney-client, if the executive session was for attorney-client communication, then the two of you are having the debrief, well, the attorney's no longer there, right? So I think that's a problem, right? You want to, for attorney-client communications, the best way to make sure they're 100% protected is to always have the attorney present. And the executive session is really the only way to ensure that your collective discussion of a legal matter can be protected. So there's a little more of an opportunity if it's just the two of you having a discussion. You can see how plaintiffs' attorneys might be able to pick at that and say, well, let's get a little offer of proof or summary of the topics that were discussed, and I get to probe a little bit of whether there was some discussion that I'm entitled to have you testify to, right?
I have a question.
Yeah.
To clarify, what if it's not an attorney-client matter? Does that make a difference?
Same kind of thing that goes on. I think that the two of you can have a discussion about it, right? And I think that's fine. I just think, the question could be, it'd be a little bit harder when the chips are down to ensure that that remains 100% confidential, right?
Thank you.
Yeah. I think the other way of saying this is if you want your discussions to be confidential as council members, the most surefire way to do it is to make sure you're having an executive session, obviously only for an authorized topic. And then what if you leave executive session and you say, darn it, we didn't get a chance to talk through that issue. I got new thoughts about that. How do I do that? Should I call, talk to my colleagues individually? I think the better course is let's get back together in executive session.
Right.
Right, we just set that up and have another executive session.
Sam, we're at 8:55.
Yes.
Do you want to get into the transparent electronic communications?
Yeah, I'm going to
Or
move.
down to the social media piece?
Yeah, I'm going to move quickly too, because I think we've hit on some of these things. There are risks around social media. My newspaper clippings here demonstrate that. So be cognizant of those issues. For you all, here is the list of some concerns that can come up, right, around social media. If you're using social media for discussions among 3 or more of you about pending public business, the merits or substance of pending public business, that can trigger the openness requirement, and there can be a concern there, right? There's, admittedly, we don't have reported decisions yet on exactly how that operates, but just like email or texting, seems kind of self-evident that if 3 or more of us are on social media having a discussion, of tomorrow night's agenda item, is that an open meeting? Is that an open discussion? Not necessarily, right? Because social media is not a purely open forum. Yeah.
What if you get tagged by a resident or another council member in a post and they tag all of us?
Well, you've done nothing wrong because you're not having a discussion yet, right?
What if I give them a thumbs up?
What's that?
If I hit the thumbs up?
Well, we're getting into the rabbit hole. There is a little bit of reported case law around what is the meaning of a thumbs up. So
I think to elaborate,
Okay.
obviously, I think what Sam's saying is if you get tagged, there's no action that you've taken to get tagged.
Yeah.
Replying, right? And then another council member replies, potentially unknowing that you've also replied in a 200-person tag. I don't know that there's published case law on this, but the conservative approach would be if you have a matter that's going to be before council, stay silent on social media about it, and particularly in the comment section of a post. And, from my perspective, I want to make sure that you're protecting your right at the dais to vote and to participate.
Yeah, particularly on quasi-judicial matters. You know how it is. There's a controversial development coming up. Social media is aflame with all this discussion, and it can be frustrating. But you as the judges, right, I want you to stay in the game as the decision makers. And on quasi-judicial matters, in particular land use development applications, part of that obligation, right, is to stay above the fray, to remain neutral, impartial, to not get on the social media fray and be reading information, because you have a great process for land use decision making, and that's your public hearing, right? So be careful of that as well. I think really we all in good sense know where the line is drawn and what the case would look like. If we're actually using social media as a proxy to talk to our fellow council members, right? And those of us in the know that that's what's going on. And the flip side is we got to be eyes up of saying to ourselves, aren't we really trying to have a discussion of public business as council members via social media? And that's where the claim that's going to have traction comes from, you know. But as your city attorney said, if you're looking for a bright line rule, right? If you all get tagged on those things, then just stay away from it. Yeah, I get that the citizens want you to be responsive, but who agrees with this notion? Is social media kind of a great forum for adjudicating the difficult issues?
No,
Of
it's
the day that
horrible.
you're
You
dealing
shouldn't
with.
be making policy through
Yeah.
social media or conducting independent surveys or whatever for business.
That was my next question is what if they're trying to sway it?
Right.
They're trying to,
Sway,
well, if it's on a legislative matter, not quasi-judicial, and you want to spend time reading social media about this or that general ordinance, you can do that. You can do your own research. That's fine. They're you know, yeah.
Not your own research,
Thank you.
but making an actual post about it as a council member.
I think that it is okay, particularly when, again, you have two hats, quasi-judicial, legislative. Legislative affords itself a much broader authority for you guys to get feedback from the community beforehand. In the quasi-judicial space, you absolutely should not be inquiring, you should not be investigating, you should simply be hearing what is submitted to you and presented to you in the administrative hearing. The legislative hat is much broader. I think the big issue with social media is when there's deliberation, and I'm not saying this body's doing it, but when there's deliberation amongst council members on a matter that necessitates formal action, right? You don't want to be deliberating, either legislatively or in the quasi-judicial space, amongst each other on social media.
So the key is to remain impartial and neutral.
On quasi-judicial matters. Yeah, on the
Or-
land use, I don't know if you do any licensing work, but on, if it's just a pure policy legislative issue, right? Whatever your current legislative agenda may be, it's from a legal perspective, it's fine to post about those things if you would like to do that, right? This slide talks about a couple of things about that issue that may not translate to liability risks. That might just be food for thought for y'all, right? With regard to my earlier comments, you know, there's always a public perception that you're a public official 24/7, right? So when you're on social media, people are always reading that with your public official hat. But do we all agree with the notion that among the 9 council members, we're all on an equal playing field, right? And so do we ever, through our social media activity, create perceptions either internally or externally that we're purporting to speak for the council before the council has yet spoken, right? Are we attempting to drive the voice one way or the other before we've even gotten together to articulate our own voice, right? I'm not saying it ever results in a liability issue, and I get that social media is the place where a lot of people want to share their thoughts on the legislative issues of the day, and that's fine. That's just what I've seen a little bit on, right? And then the other piece in terms of your own self-preservation, whether it's legal or sanity, is going back to my earlier comment about is it the place to adjudicate the lofty issues of the day, right? I think social media is probably a good tool for keeping it light, you know, highlighting and reminding the citizens of all the great things you do and all the issues that you got going on. But you know how it is, right? That if you're posting something and somebody doesn't believe it, you're just going to get a thread of that's all incorrect and this and that, and you got to then decide, am I going to battle against all that, right? And how long am I going to perpetuate or endure a conversation, right, around some issue? Yeah. Yes.
Last week, I sit in on a, was it last week or this week? Last week. I sit in on an oil and gas session online, and at the end of the session, they specifically ask for council members or county commissioners. They just said, I can see we have some council members online and, you know, do you have any comments? Well, once they outed me as a council member, I felt like anything I said, I could be sticking my neck out there.
Sure. Yeah, that's kind of an internal dynamic as well. I always
And
encourage
so
you
I
to.
just kept quiet.
Yeah. I encourage you to protect if you're, and you got enough going on the night you're meeting here in this room, but I bet you're all serving in liaison roles to some extent or another. Right, I encourage you to extent that liaison work relates to your work as a council member. So I encourage you to protect your own turf as a council member and as a council. You know how it goes, just as you said, you'll go to some meeting of some other organization and all of a sudden, we didn't know it, but they have some emergency. And they go, oh, we need to sign this letter to the governor, and we'd like City of Commerce City to sign on. And I see we have a council member here from Commerce City. So, council member, you know, what's the city's position? And you go, well, we haven't even had a chance to talk about it, right?
Right, and they also had a county commissioner there that, and I have to admit, she did a very good job at dancing around that questions. She never answered nothing.
Yeah, so that could be another issue as well. All right, any more questions about social media stuff? All right, ethics, just in the interest of time, we do separate trainings on ethics. We're happy to come back and do that. But just for the new members, I did want to remind you, you know, make sure you're familiar with the code of ethics that applies. You understand the basic rules around conflicts of interest, that obligation to disclose, recuse yourself from the discussion and vote if council's going to take some action that affects your own personal financial interest. You probably have procedures around whether you leave the room or not.
Yes, we do.
Okay.
It's not, whether we leave the room certainly applies to council in the process of not voting, but that doesn't technically live under the code of ethics.
Okay. And then, of course, confidential information. If you want a war story, had one of those executive sessions where the concern was not leakage, but it was misuse of the confidential information for the elected official's own benefit. It was a confidential executive session to develop strategy for purchasing a piece of property. And the elected official knew what the city's price was going to be, and what did they do? Good idea? No. So that was a problem. So we know that, and that's implicated by the codes of ethics. Gifts are also implicated by the code of ethics, but I got a simple takeaway on that. There's a lot in the codes of ethics about gifts, but the simple takeaway is, you know, if the gift doesn't look right, feel right, smell right in the context, we just deny the gift. I mean, the more legalistic way of saying it is usually the gift rules say, don't accept a gift of over a certain amount if it's in any way related to public service, and obviously don't accept a gift if it's attempting to try and get you to depart from the faithful and impartial discharge of your duties. But it's so much just about the timing and context. So the one thing I do want to mention about ethics is this. Do you agree with this notion that in matters of ethics, sometimes perception equals reality and reality equals perception, right? So a couple of things in that regard. First, as you get familiar, particularly for the new folks, with the Code of Ethics, recognize you're not on an island. I readily admit that codes of ethics are written by attorneys. Sounds like a lot of legalese. There's a lot of seemingly subjective language in there, right? But I'm pretty sure your city attorney and manager's office will always take that call and would prefer to get that call earlier if you're struggling with an ethics issue. Because it's better to try and work through it in advance. The most troubling ethics situation is when it's unfolding in real time at the dais for the first time, where somebody in the audience stands up and says, Mayor, you know, before you start this land use matter, I need to chime in on something. I think one of the council members needs to recuse themselves because they have a conflict. And now it's all unfolding. And so, you know, and these are nuanced things. It's like maybe you live in the neighborhood, but how far away is okay? Or how close is not okay, right? What about an interest of a relative, an in-law? Or what about, you know, an interest for purposes of the conflict of interest includes not only yourself, but relatives, business ownerships? What about personal friends? Those kinds of things. So the one thing I would encourage you about that appearance piece is sometimes you're in a situation where you've done all the hard work. You've analyzed the code, you talked to the attorney and the manager, and you realize, I don't have any actual conflict of interest, so I'm not obligated to make a disclosure or recuse myself. But you get to the meeting, and there's still this like cloud in the room. You can just sense somebody in the audience is still looking at you going, why is she up there? I thought she had a conflict of interest and needs to recuse herself. So there's great value in just saying something on the record. Right, you say, Mayor, before we start the discussion of the award of this contract, I just want to address something because I've heard some suggestion that I have a conflict of interest. I just want to assure everyone that I've looked at our code, I've talked with the attorney, I don't have a conflict that requires recusal, but as important, and more importantly, I want to make sure everybody understands that I intend to cast my vote on this matter, according to whatever the rules and standards apply, and the best interest of the city, and that's that. So now everybody knows, and you've cleared the air with this otherwise cloud that's just hovering over you, so yeah. The other thing nice thing about codes of ethics, you ever feel like sometimes you're on the receiving end of like an ethics allegation that's way off the dartboard? You got a conflict of interest because you live in the city. That's not true, right? There's exceptions for the general public interest and stuff like that. But if you know the code of ethics, got a good working familiarity with it, then you're prepared to educate that person and remind them, hey, I take this stuff seriously. I know what a conflict is, and this is the deal, right? So that's a nice place to be. All right, last thing I want to mention before we wrap it up is just a couple comments about personal conduct. So beyond the code of ethics, sometimes public service on a multi-member elected governing body is going to ask that we make personal sacrifices regarding our own personal conduct. Right? I admit I'm getting a little outside of my lane here because maybe it's not a third-party liability risk. Sometimes it is, as I'll explain in a moment. But sometimes the job, I think, does require that we make personal sacrifices for the betterment of the council as an institution, making the council stronger. Things like, being willing to set aside a personal agenda or lack of support when there's lack of support. You may have run for office or sought appointment because you wanted to get this one thing done. But if you can't find a majority to come along with you, right, you got to be willing to shelve that personal interest or agenda first in view of service of the plan, work plan, and priorities of the council as a council. I think we mentioned split votes and the risk around that. I think the job sometimes requires admission that we're all going to win some or lose some. That if we are on the losing end of something, right, we don't have to be the main cheerleader, of the decision that was reached, but I do think it does make the organization stronger if we don't attack the decision that was made or go to our people and say, that was a dumb, stupid decision, and I didn't vote for that stinker, right? Is it stronger if we say, hey, I didn't vote for that one, but we had a good discussion. We had a great deliberation as council. We had 9 different points of view, but we worked through it and we reached a decision, and I respect the decision that was reached. Yeah. So it can lead to those liability claims that I mentioned, like the person on the short end of the vote attempting to intentionally frustrate the effectuation of the decision. Yes.
And I think that's where our civility comes in, that we're trying to model. We adopted something this year, and I think this hits it right there.
Yeah, it's kind of that willingness to agree to disagree and move on, right? And recognize that we're all on the same level, that no matter what our perspectives on the issue, we actively and respectfully listen to each other's viewpoints, that every member feels like no matter how difficult the issue, that they have the support and space to say their piece in a civil, respectful way, and know that others are listening to that, right? And that once we reach that decision, we're done and we commit to the decision was made and move on. So, yeah. All right. So with that, we got through another legislative session. That's a good thing. We had some wins and some losses this year, but when I was thinking about this, there's a lot about risk that we can't control. Like what the legislature, we can have some influence, but we can't ultimately control what the legislator does or what public perceptions are, or what the inclinations of the judges might be, right? But there are certainly in the areas that we can control, we want to embrace that, right? that it's a wise body that commits to working together to control the risks that they can control and do the things that help support and build faith and trust in government. And I've listed a bunch of them on the next slide in illegible size text for the screen, but they're in the materials that are in the packet. So with that, I'll open it up to any final questions you have for me, other than point out that there's some more resources on the last slide, and I also brought some copies of our handbook for folks who don't have that. So
Thank you, Sam. Really appreciate your perspective and going through this in such detail. Any council members have any questions for Sam before we wrap it up? Seeing none. Councilmember Kim, did you have anything you want to add?
thank you.
All right. Thank you, Sam. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Have a good evening.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, on to reports. City Manager Rogers.
Thank you, Mayor. I have two updates. One maybe a discussion point for you all. The first one, Music in the Park. That comes back this Thursday from 6:30 to 8:30 at Veterans Memorial Park. That's with featuring Chicano Heat. As you all know, this has been one of our annual events that we provide to our community. We have really good turnout. We average around 900 people an event for the Music in the Park. So season kicks off this Thursday. So for those who are interested, once again, 6:30 to 8:30 at Veterans Memorial Park, and we are featuring Chicano Heat. The piece that I would love to get some consensus as it falls into council's role for discussion is that Adams County is attempting to pull together a group of stakeholders to advocate, strategize, and potentially pursue transit in the North Metro region, particularly the expansion of the N line. RTD estimates approximately $396 million is needed to complete the remaining 5.5 miles or 5.5 miles from East Lake and 124th Avenue to State Highway 7. Adams County has visited with RTD on 2 occasions to discuss and present information regarding the galvanization of this coalition. And RTD staff has expressed an interest and is now working directly with the county to develop a proposal as quickly as possible to secure the funding commitment from the Fast Tracks Internal Savings Account, that is FISA or FISA, before other regional priorities secure the majority or all of the FISA capacity. The county has a narrow window on the potential funding opportunity before it is fully absorbed by the Northwest Corridor and the Front Range Passenger Rail initiatives. The county is preparing a formal request for approximately $55 million for available funding sources, including FISA and Rail Funding Program Cash Fund, to advance the unfinished portion of the N line, as I had previously stated. So in addition to that, they are seeking an agreement with RTD that will establish a model of shared governance to ensure that the deliverables and expectations of the project are met. What I would share with you, and this has been, I've had a couple of emails out to you all to prime this discussion, and I would say that this is just still in its infancy about the actual coalition, but they have presented a different request at this time, which is seeking a letter of support or us signing on to a letter of support. That signing on to a letter of support was attached to the email that I provided to you all this morning. And having us join that will, in their minds, strengthen their application that is due by this Friday to RTD. They are not asking for a funding commitment today or a funding position from Commerce City today. But once again, they are hoping that as they continue to socialize this idea of an informal organization around this coalition on the N line, which would be inclusive of Brighton, North Glen, Thornton, Commerce City, Adams County, that there would be more robust discussion in support of the extension of the line, but also hopefully other closely related matters around infrastructure from a regional perspective. But today is more or less really the focus on that letter of support, or join that letter of support, for me to be able to communicate that back to the county that yes, we are willing to sign on We do have your signatures electronically, so it is not that hard for us to take that step. But I need your guidance and your direction on whether or not this is something that you want to entertain in support of the county and their goal of extending the N line station, or N line itself, sorry.
Is the council okay with a support letter recommendation? Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor, and that's all that I had for tonight.
All right. City Attorney Zarzaki.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Council. I recognize that it's a long night and appreciate you taking the time to listen to Sam. Obviously, under the charter, it is my role to help provide legal advice to all of you. I would ask that in the next couple of days, if you have 10 minutes to think about what you learned this evening, what was helpful and what was not, I'd be very appreciative of you sending this to me. As I mentioned at the beginning of the evening, I think it's appropriate to have this on an annual basis. Of course, if council disagrees, then I will not schedule it next year. But I think it's just a really good reminder of the things that you should all be considering. My job is to try to make sure that we are all operating within the confines of our charter authorities so that we are protecting you and we're protecting the city. So thanks. That is all I have.
Thank you. Any questions for our city attorney?
Yes, City Attorney Zarzaki, could you please speak to the question of brown or dead grass and fining people and that sort of stuff?
Yes, so the Mayor Pro Tem had reached out this afternoon inquiring about a recent ordinance that is making the news in Castle Rock as it pertains to City Council in Castle Rock, approving an ordinance that prohibits HOAs from enforcing their covenants on basically not allowing to have great brown grass, dry grass that's dying. I reached out to the city attorney the town attorney in Castle Rock this afternoon. I've still not heard back from him. I will reach out to him tomorrow morning. I think the fundamental question is there a state law that prohibits, my understanding is this question is there state law that prohibits HOAs from enforcing their covenants in a drought? And I don't believe that there is state law that currently prohibits it. So some municipalities are proactively approving resolutions that are prohibiting it. I would need to do a little bit more homework to make sure that I understand exactly what the logic was in Castle Rock. And frankly, I didn't see anything in the news if it was in fact approved. I think it was on second reading last Monday, but I didn't see if it was approved.
And the second question is, and this is related to the drought also, is that there has been stepped up interest in having synthetic turf in front yards. Is synthetic turf allowed by Commerce City? And secondly, where?
So no, it is not allowed under our code. HOAs, it's possible that HOAs allow it under their existing rules. They may not have updated HOA covenant or rules after we prohibit it in front lawns. Nevertheless, right, municipal law governs. It is the law of the land in this community, and HOAs cannot circumvent that rule or legal requirement by way of allowing it in their HOA documentation.
And just to reiterate, that is only in front yards.
Synthetic turf, artificial turf is prohibited in both front and rear yards. It is prohibited in its totality by our municipal code.
Oh, okay. What about the right-of-way? The tree
Prohibited.
line? Okay, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
I just wanted to point out, I think that issue with Castle Rock, that we're in a different situation because we have a water department that's a special district. And they set down the rules saying you only water twice a week.
I think that is an astute point, and it's something that I have flagged. We do have a Water Commission meeting with SAC West tomorrow afternoon. I recommend that that's a topic of conversation. And quickly looking at SAC West's webpage, they did, I believe, state that they're in I think it's a stage 1 drought as well, similar to what the water department within Castle Rock determined. But you're absolutely right. That's a good conversation to be had with the Water Commission.
And the city of Aurora has the ability to know when you're watering your grass with their upgraded meter system. Commerce City does not have that technology, so they can look at your bill on how much water you used, but they don't know what day you're watering unless they actually see it. I just thought I'd let everybody know.
One more question.
So while we were in this meeting, I actually did get a message from their town attorney and that it was in fact approved unanimously on second reading on the 2nd. So I will reach out to him to get some more details on the conversations that were had prior to that passage.
Thank you.
Yeah, I have a follow-up question on the drought restrictions. Is there anything that said the municipality, that the city of Commerce City had to comply with the South Adams County Water and Sanitation District water restrictions as well?
That's a good question. I don't recall offhand. I don't think so, but I can certainly look into that.
And then in which case would that be a policy decision if we suggest that we do adhere to it in order to lead by example?
By practice, we already are doing that, so I've made that decision with my team. So by practice, we are already complying with the drought.
You are?
Yes, ma'am.
Just not on the golf course. I said, just not on the golf course.
Well, the golf course is coming out of our well. We're not connected into that, but with respect to the overall drought, we are working in coordination and complying. And we are also ensuring that we are communicating on behalf of them, as you may have seen in our connected newsletter, the drought itself to our community so that they are also duly noted.
Yes, thank you for noting that, since this is being recorded, so I appreciate that. Any other questions or comments? Hey, council, you have any reports? Councilmember Goriola?
Thank you, Mayor. Couple things. I met with the Social Justice Together Colorado group at the parish. Very, very productive meeting with them. A couple just highlights is I sent city manager a policy memo, research and resources that this group has done on the contract for universal data sharing. They understand FLOC and they want to help make a better contract, which again, they all said they support it. Safety's first. And so I'm excited because they had some really good questions that our city attorney and city manager will have to look into and give their thoughts. It's exciting that this group is invested in collaboration on issues with the city. The second thing was communication, with the father talking about how do we communicate with our residents even more and be accessible. And the city staff, with Mr. Rogers, is already working on a communication plan and making it accessible. So it's good to hear that our city staff is already working on stuff like this. So again, I'll be meeting with them monthly. I think it's a good group to meet with on different things. The other thing is great job to the citizens, Senior Citizens Fair. I thought I stopped in for the first hour. Kudos to Councilwoman Noble and her table. I think the table she has as city council is something that we should all think about. She has 3 great posters that really explain what city council is, the org chart, the wards. So I asked if I could get some of those, because I think even all of us should have access to those because they're very informational. The other thing is, I think we should think of, when we do have those events, how do city council staff a table like that? We don't have to have swag, but just people coming up to us and us being there. So again, kudos to Councilwoman Noble and the staff for putting that on. They had a seminar, they had great resources for our seniors. And then we had Council Connect with Councilwoman Trujillo, spent 2 hours with residents, great listening session, great ideas. One of the big things that I took from that is residents asking if we could do a better job of coordinating these. Some residents wanted to go to Mayor Douglas' coffee with the mayor, some wanted to come. And I know this is the second time I've heard that, because we had stuff before with Councilmember Dukes and Councilmember Kim. So just throwing it out to my colleagues, like when we schedule, maybe we could coordinate something so more residents that are going to these things could go to all of them, because there was an interest. So that's all I got. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other council members? Councilmember Trujillo or Young? Mayor Pro Tem Nimble.
Thank you very much, Mayor. I agree with Councilor Guardiola. In fact, some of the folks at the senior resource fair would have loved to have seen all the council members, and so that will be good for the future. But this was their 4th year. Fantastic senior resource fair. Everybody's pleased with the outcome, and they work incredibly hard to put it together. So having members of the city council attend is something that they make note of and are appreciative. But I really appreciate all the work that they put in. It was really a great event. I also attended a community engagement session at Denver Botanic Gardens. We all got an invitation to that, and it turned out to be really interesting in terms of how to have community engagement on important topics in a municipality, and also when they are controversial topics, how to move those topics forward. It was worthwhile attending it. And lastly, Mayor Douglas and I had our meeting with Suncor Refinery, with the new VP, Dennis Banks, and also the government relations representative. And I really found it to be a very robust conversation. And what was important to me was his definition of a partnership. And a partnership, according to Mr. Banks, was transparency and communication. And I asked him about criticism, hearing from opposition. And he said, no, he wants to hear that. He wants to know what's going on in the community. One of the takeaways of things that we wanted to move forward with was to have a meeting in the community with community leaders who were impacted by the recent event at Suncor, and for assistance in coming up with language for the notifications. It was, as he explained, a very complicated event, and I appreciate the pressure that they were under. He seemed like a really great person, and I'm glad he's here in Commerce City. He said he has new directions for where they're going to put money. He appreciates the size of the budget that Calgary provides to them, and I look forward to having further conversations. He did ask that the mayor and I attend the meeting with the community leaders, which we will do, and we'll be working with the government relations person to arrange for that.
Thank you. Anyone else? Sure. Councilmember Corrigan.
Thank you. Could that be open to all of us, that meeting?
It depends, because there's two of us.
Right, but
It
if we have an
depends on the
agenda?
interpretation of that.
Yes, if you noticed it as an open meeting, then you could.
Yeah, it was just going to be small with just leaders.
I'd like to attend.
All right, well, we'll see how they want to move forward with that then.
All right, thank you. All right, most things have already been said, and I really appreciate council members having extra meetings for our constituents to attend. I had to switch mine due to graduation, and I shrinked mine from 8 to 9 I didn't want to clash with anyone else and like that, you know, trying to have some room for everybody, right? I wasn't able to make it to the senior commission, resource commission, resource fair, so I apologize for that. I had a meeting with developer, Devinder Sandhu for 96 and Tower, and I relayed that to City Manager Rogers. He was asking about permitting and based on our last conversation, so I appreciate City Manager with your feedback. Thank you. Also been meeting with and talking with Mark Bush, who is overseeing the 120th construction and actually focus on residents asking him questions, and they want to know what's going on. So I've been putting that out. He wants to meet up sometime this week to do a walkthrough of 120th construction. He wants me to be there to show me what's going on as far as what is taking place. There's a lot of perception out there that the workers aren't working. Yeah, you know how that is when we have construction delays and all that. So just want to clear some of those misnomers up for our community. I want to shout out to AMS 14 School District. A couple weeks ago, they went out to Washington, D.C. for a National Memorial Day Parade. I really appreciate the students and their families attending, along with some board members. And they did a great representation for Commerce City. It made national news, and it was televised as well. So I will be out of town next week, but I will be online, and Mayor Pro Tem will be in my presence for that meeting. So, any other council members? Seeing none, it's 9:35. Meeting is adjourned. Thank you. The rest of the hearing, guys.